Power in England had many faces, but in the frozen north it wore only one: Duke Caedric Valemont. They said he could ruin a man with a signature, destroy a family with a word, and bend Parliament itself when the mood struck him. At 32, he ruled Yorkshire not through birthright alone, but through calculated cruelty that made grown men weep behind closed doors. Yet on this particular winter morning, standing in the empty throne room of Valamont Hall, while snow buried the world outside, the most powerful duke in England faced something he had never encountered before: a woman who refused to fear him. What happens when absolute power meets absolute defiance? Stay until the final word drops, and if this tale grips your soul, let me know in the comments below. The great hall of Valamont stood silent as a crypt. Caedric Valemont descended the central staircase with the measured pace of a predator who had never known hurry. Each footfall echoed against stone walls that had witnessed 3 centuries of Valamont dominion. Morning light struggled through stained glass windows, casting fragmented colors across his severe features. Tall, lean, dressed in black wool that made his pale eyes seem carved from winter itself. He reached the bottom step and paused, surveying the empty space where nobles once gathered to beg favors. That was before he had stopped granting them, before Yorkshire learned that mercy was a luxury the Duke no longer offered. His steward, Edmund Thorne, waited near the fireplace, shoulders rigid with the particular tension that preceded bad news. How predictable, Caedric thought. Bad news was the only kind that ever reached him anymore. "Edmund, tell me which fool has decided to test my patience today." The steward cleared his throat. "Your Grace, Lord Ashford has failed to deliver the timber shipment. 3rd month running." Caedric walked to the window overlooking the frozen gardens. Ice covered everything. Beautiful, lifeless, perfect. And what reason does he provide this time? "The roads are impassable, Your Grace. The winter has been harsh." "Yes, I am aware of the weather, Edmund. I am also aware that Lord Ashford gambles more than he works, drinks more than he thinks, and believes my leniency is infinite simply because I have not yet destroyed him." He turned from the window, and Edmund instinctively took a half-step backward. "Send word to Ashford. His lands are forfeit, his title revoked. His family has until spring to vacate their estate. Your Grace, his daughter is only—" "I did not ask about his family, Edmund. I asked you to deliver a message. Can you manage that? Or shall I find someone who can?" The steward bowed deeply. "It will be done immediately, Your Grace." Caedric returned his attention to the frozen landscape. Somewhere beneath that snow, Yorkshire struggled to survive another brutal season. Farmers hoarded grain, merchants raised prices. Families burned furniture to stay warm. None of it concerned him. They had chosen to live in the north. They had chosen to serve House Valamont. Survival was their problem to solve. "Your Grace," Edmund said carefully, "there is one other matter." Caedric did not turn. "Speak. Lady Isolde Carrington has arrived." The name landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. Caedric remained motionless for 3 full seconds before responding. "I gave no invitation." "No, Your Grace." She came unannounced. "Where is she now?" "The East Drawing Room." She insisted on waiting. How bold. How spectacularly foolish. Caedric crossed the hall with long strides, Edmund hurrying to keep pace. They moved through corridors lined with portraits of dead Valamonts, each one more stern than the last. His ancestors had built this empire through conquest and strategic marriages. Caedric had expanded it through methods they would have considered barbaric. He preferred to think of them as efficient. The drawing room doors stood open. Inside, a woman stood with her back to the entrance, studying a painting of his father. She turned as he entered. Lady Isolde Carrington was 26 years old and considered by London society to be one of the great beauties of her generation. Dark hair, porcelain skin, eyes the color of autumn storms. Caedric found her entirely unremarkable. She wore a traveling dress of deep burgundy that had somehow survived the journey north without losing its elegance. Snow still clung to the hem. Her hands were bare, fingers red from cold. "Duke Valemont," she said, executing a curtsy that managed to convey both respect and subtle defiance. "Thank you for receiving me." "I did not receive you," he replied coldly. "You invaded my home without invitation or warning. There is a difference." She straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. Most women looked away after 5 seconds. Men lasted 10 if they were brave. Isolde held his stare. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said. But written requests seemed unlikely to reach you, given your reputation for ignoring correspondence that displeases you. My reputation, he said slowly, is that I destroy people who waste my time. Are you aware of this? Intimately aware, Your Grace. She moved away from the painting, her posture relaxed despite the danger she had walked into. Caedric recognized the performance. He had seen it 1,000 times in Parliament, at gaming tables, in ballrooms across England. People pretending confidence while terror churned beneath the surface. He decided to accelerate her education. My steward is currently drafting a letter that will ruin Lord Ashford, he said conversationally. His crime is incompetence and the mistaken belief that I care about excuses. What is your crime? Lady Isolde? She stopped near the fireplace, warming her hands. I have no crime, Your Grace. I have a proposal. Caedric almost smiled. Almost. A proposal. How enterprising. And what could you possibly offer that I do not already possess? Information about your brother. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caedric did not move, did not blink. But something shifted in the air between them, and Isolde felt it immediately. I have no brother, he said quietly. You had a brother, she corrected. Alexander Valemont. Disappeared 7 years ago, presumed dead, never found, ancient history. History that haunts you, she pressed. History that keeps you awake at night in this frozen fortress while the rest of Yorkshire sleeps. Caedric crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Isolde held her ground, but her breath caught as he stopped mere inches away. You know nothing about what haunts me, he said softly. You are a child playing games with forces you cannot comprehend. Leave my house before I have you dragged out. Isolde lifted her chin, eyes flashing. I know Alexander wrote to me 2 months before he vanished. I know he was investigating corruption in the northern trade routes. I know he suspected someone in your own household was selling information to your enemies. She paused, then delivered the killing blow. And I know you never found out who. Silence. Caedric studied her face with the intensity of a man examining a chessboard before a critical move. She was lying, or she was insane, or she was the first person in 7 years who actually knew something useful. All 3 options were dangerous. Show me the letter, he said finally. I burned it. Of course you did. How convenient. Isolde reached into her dress pocket and produced a small object wrapped in silk. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver compass. But I kept this. Alexander sent it with the letter. Your father's compass, according to the inscription. Caedric stared at the object in her palm. He had not seen that compass in 15 years. It had vanished along with his brother. His hand moved before conscious thought, reaching for it. Isolde closed her fingers, withdrawing the compass. Not yet, Your Grace. You are playing a very dangerous game, Lady Isolde. I am playing the only game that matters, she replied. Survival. My father died 6 months ago. He left debts that would make your eyes water. My uncle claims the estate, and he has made it clear I am unwelcome. I have 3 choices. Marry a man old enough to be my grandfather, become a governess in some provincial household, or find another way forward. And you believe I am that way forward. I believe you want answers about your brother more than you want my suffering. I am offering a trade. Caedric turned away, pacing to the window. Outside, snow continued falling in thick sheets, burying the gardens deeper. What is it you want? She moved beside him, her reflection ghostly in the frost-covered glass. Protection. A place in your household, an arrangement that keeps my uncle from claiming everything my father built. You want me to save you. I want you to employ me. There is a difference. Caedric laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound that held no humor. And why would I burden myself with a penniless woman whose only asset is a compass and a story about a dead brother? Because the story is not finished, she said. Because Alexander's letters mentioned a name, Blackthorn. And because that name makes you angrier than anything else I have said today. She was right. The Blackthorns were Caedric's enemies in every sense that mattered. Political rivals, economic competitors. The one family in England that refused to bend when he applied pressure. If Alexander had been investigating them before his disappearance. Fine, Caedric said abruptly. You may stay. Edmund will arrange quarters in the north wing. You will take your meals alone. You will not speak to the staff about anything beyond basic necessities. You will provide me with every detail you know about Alexander's investigation. And if I refuse, then I will write to your uncle this afternoon with a detailed account of your debts and suggest he accelerate his claim on your father's estate. You will be destitute by Sunday. Isolde extended her hand. Then we have an understanding, Your Grace. He looked at her offered hand with distaste. We have an arrangement. Understanding would require me to care about your opinions, which I assure you I do not. He walked past her without another word, leaving her standing alone in the drawing room with the compass still clutched in her palm. Edmund materialized in the corridor outside. Prepare the north wing, Caedric ordered. Lady Isolde will be staying indefinitely. Assign her the smallest room. No fire after 9. Meals delivered to her door. Is she a prisoner, Your Grace? Caedric paused mid-stride. She is an asset. Treat her accordingly. That evening, Caedric sat alone in his private study while the grandfather clock marked the passing hours. Papers covered his desk. Trade routes. Tax records. Letters from Parliament requesting his attendance at debates he would not attend. He ignored all of it. Instead, he studied the compass Isolde had returned to him after their negotiation. Silver. Engraved. His father's initials worn smooth from years of handling. Alexander had carried this compass everywhere, and now it had returned like a ghost made manifest. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. The door opened. Isolde stood in the threshold, still wearing the burgundy traveling dress. She had not been given time to change or unpack. You wish to see me, Your Grace? Caedric gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. Tell me everything about the letter Alexander sent you. She settled into the chair with the careful movements of someone navigating enemy territory. The letter arrived 7 years ago this winter. It was brief, cryptic. He said he had discovered something that would change everything about how we understood the northern trade. What specifically? He did not say, but he mentioned Blackthorn repeatedly. He said someone in that family was manipulating shipping records to avoid taxes while blaming the losses on pirates. Convenient accusation against my enemy. Isolde met his gaze steadily. Unless it is true. Caedric leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Why would Alexander write to you? You were barely 19. He had advisors, allies. Why a girl he had danced with twice at a ball? He trusted me, she said simply. Your brother was kind to me when others were not. I was nobody, the daughter of a minor lord with no prospects. But Alexander saw me, spoke to me like I mattered. She paused, looking away toward the fire crackling in the hearth. The week before he disappeared, I received another letter. One line. If anything happens to me, remember the name Blackthorn. And then he vanished. Caedric watched her face carefully. She believed what she was saying. Whether it was truth or delusion remained unclear. You loved him, he said. It was not a question. Isolde stiffened. I respected him. There is a difference. Is there? Because from where I sit, it appears you have spent 7 years carrying a torch for a dead man and convincing yourself there is mystery instead of accepting tragedy. Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. Your brother was murdered. The North knows it. London whispers it. The only person who pretends otherwise is you, because admitting murder means admitting you failed to protect him. The silence that followed was absolute. Caedric stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the chill of winter itself. I will give you one warning, Lady Isolde. You are here because you have information I require. That protection extends exactly as far as your usefulness. The moment you become tedious, I will cast you out with nothing but the clothes you wore when you arrived. Do you understand? Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. You may go. She stood, executed a precise curtsy, and walked to the door. But before leaving, she turned back. You asked why Alexander trusted me, she said quietly. It was because I was the only person who did not want anything from him. Everyone else saw the Duke's brother, the political asset, the spare heir. I just saw a man who was drowning in expectations and desperately looking for someone to believe him when he said something was wrong. She left before Caedric could respond. He remained standing in the empty study, staring at the closed door. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind howled against the windows. Snow piled against the walls of Valamont Hall until the entire estate seemed buried in white silence. And in that silence, Caedric acknowledged the truth he had been avoiding for 7 years. Alexander had been right about something, and that something had killed him. The following morning brought news that shattered the fragile peace of Valamont Hall. Lord Ashford was dead. Caedric received the report while breaking his fast in the small dining room. Edmund delivered it with the grave formality of a man who understood the implications immediately. How? Caedric asked without looking up from his plate. Suicide, Your Grace. He hanged himself in his study last night, left a note blaming his gambling debts and failed investments. Caedric set down his fork carefully. How convenient. A man receives notice of his impending ruin and immediately ends himself rather than facing the consequences. The timing is suspicious, Edmund agreed. Suspicious is generous. It is orchestrated. Someone wanted Ashford dead before I could question him about his failed shipments. But Your Grace, who would— Caedric stood abruptly. Prepare my horse. I am riding to Ashford's estate immediately. The roads are still dangerous from the storm. Then I will ride dangerously. Within the hour, Caedric was mounted on his black stallion, riding through snow that reached the horse's knees. 2 of his men accompanied him, both armed and grim-faced. They reached Ashford Manor by midday. The estate was smaller than Valamont Hall, but still impressive by Yorkshire standards. Stone walls, iron gates, iron. Gardens that would have been beautiful if they were not buried in snow. A servant opened the door, eyes red from weeping. Duke Valemont, she stammered. We did not expect— Where is the body? Caedric demanded. Still in the study, Your Grace. The magistrate has not yet arrived from the village. Good. Take me there. The study was exactly what Caedric expected. Dark wood paneling, shelves filled with books that had never been read, a desk covered in unpaid bills. Lord Ashford hung from a beam near the window, rope tight around his neck, face purple and swollen. Caedric studied the scene with clinical detachment, the position of the chair, the knot of the rope, the angle of the body. He walked around the desk, examining papers, gambling debts, letters from creditors. Nothing unusual. Then he found it, a ledger hidden in the bottom drawer beneath a false panel. Caedric opened it carefully. Shipping records, dates, cargo manifests, all showing timber deliveries to a company Caedric had never heard of. Blackthorn Enterprises. Your Grace? Edmund appeared in the doorway. What have you found? Caedric closed the ledger, mind racing. Ashford was not incompetent. He was selling my timber to my enemy and claiming the shipments were delayed. Then his death. Was murder disguised as suicide to silence him before I discovered the truth? Caedric left the study, the ledger tucked under his arm. He mounted his horse and rode back to Valamont Hall through the deepening snow. His brother had been investigating Blackthorn corruption. Now Ashford was dead, and Blackthorn's name was appearing in places it should not. Either this was elaborate coincidence, or someone was sending a message. When Caedric returned to Valamont Hall, he went directly to Isolde's room in the north wing. He did not knock, simply opened the door and entered. She stood near the window, wrapped in a thin shawl against the cold. The fire in her room had already burned low. She turned, startled. Your Grace, I did not expect— Lord Ashford is dead, Caedric interrupted. Hanged himself last night. Except it was not suicide, it was murder. And your theory about Blackthorn manipulation just became significantly more credible. Isolde paled. What did you find? Evidence that Ashford was selling my timber to Blackthorn while claiming weather delays. A ledger showing months of transactions I never authorized. Then Alexander was right, she whispered. Blackthorn is stealing from you, has been for years. Caedric moved closer, voice dropping to something deadly. Which means whoever killed Ashford knows I am investigating. Which means you are now in danger simply by being associated with this information. I am already in danger, Your Grace. I have been since the moment I walked through your door. He studied her face. No fear, no tears, just steady determination. Most women would have fled by now. I am not most women. No, he agreed quietly. You are not. For a moment, something shifted between them. An acknowledgement of alliance in the face of common enemy. Then Caedric stepped back, the moment broken. Pack warm clothes, he said. Tomorrow we ride to London. If Blackthorn is playing games with my trade routes, I will confront him directly. Is that wise? Isolde asked. If they killed Ashford, then they will learn that threatening me is the last mistake they will ever make. He left her room without another word. Behind him, Isolde stood alone in the cold, staring at the closed door. She had wanted protection. Instead, she had walked into the center of a war that had been brewing for 7 years, and standing beside the Duke of Shadows meant standing in the line of fire. Miss C. London in winter was a different beast than Yorkshire. The city never truly slept. Even at midnight, carriages clattered through streets slick with ice and horse manure. Vendors sold hot chestnuts on corners. Prostitutes worked the alleys near the Thames. Caedric's London residence stood in Mayfair, a four-story townhouse that spoke of wealth without ostentation. Black door, iron railings, windows that revealed nothing of the interior. He arrived with Isolde after 2 days of brutal travel. She looked exhausted, but her spine remained straight as she dismounted. Edmund met them at the door. "Your Grace? Welcome back. I have prepared the—" Later, Caedric cut him off. "Send word to Duke Lucian Blackthorne that I request an audience tomorrow morning. Private. No witnesses." Edmund hesitated. "Your Grace, Blackthorne rarely accepts social calls, especially from me. I am aware. Tell him I have information regarding mutual business interests in Yorkshire timber. That should intrigue him sufficiently. And if he refuses, then I will visit him uninvited. His choice is whether we meet as gentlemen or enemies." Edmund bowed and retreated. Isolde stood in the entrance hall, looking around the space with careful eyes. It was smaller than Valamont Hall, but more refined. Art that actually mattered. Furniture chosen for elegance rather than intimidation. "You have a different face in London," she observed. Caedric removed his gloves. "In London, power wears silk instead of iron. The result is the same." He led her upstairs to a suite of rooms overlooking the square, warmer than the north wing at Valamont. A fire already burning, fresh linens on the bed. "You will stay here during our visit," he said. "Do not leave this house without escort. Do not speak to anyone about our purpose. London has more vipers than Yorkshire, and they wear better clothing." "Understood, Your Grace." He turned to leave, then paused. "Why did you really come to me, Lady Isolde?" She looked at him, firelight casting shadows across her face. "I told you. Survival." "No. You could have found survival in a dozen different ways. You chose the most dangerous path possible." "Why?" "Because safe paths lead nowhere," she said quietly. "Because my father spent his life playing it safe and died with nothing to show but debts and disappointment. Because your brother saw something worth dying for, and I refuse to believe it was meaningless." She moved closer, and for the first time since they met, Caedric saw past her defenses. "I came to you because someone has to care about the truth, and you are the only person terrifying enough to actually find it." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding. Then Caedric nodded once and left. Isolde sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up to her. She had gambled everything on a duke who felt nothing, hoping to uncover a conspiracy that had already killed at least 2 men. Either she was brilliantly strategic or catastrophically insane. Tomorrow would reveal which. Duke Lucian Blackthorne received Caedric in a private study overlooking the Thames. The man was Caedric's age, but where Caedric wore severity like armor, Blackthorne radiated calculated charm. Tall, handsome, dressed in deep blue that made his dark eyes seem almost black. "Duke Valemont," Blackthorne said warmly, gesturing to a chair. "What an unexpected pleasure. I confess, your message intrigued me." Caedric remained standing. "I am not here for pleasantries, Blackthorne. I am here because my Yorkshire timber has been disappearing for months, and your name keeps appearing in uncomfortable places." Blackthorne's smile did not waver. Strong accusation. "I assume you have evidence?" Caedric produced Ashford's ledger, placing it on the desk between them. Shipping records showing regular deliveries to Blackthorne Enterprises. Transactions I never authorized. Payments I never received. Blackthorne opened the ledger, scanning the pages with apparent interest. "How fascinating. And where did you obtain these records?" "From a dead man who hanged himself rather conveniently the same day I discovered his betrayal." The room temperature dropped. Blackthorne closed the ledger carefully. "You are accusing me of murder and theft, Duke Valemont. Those are dangerous words." "I am stating facts," Caedric replied coldly. "You are welcome to provide an alternate explanation." Blackthorne stood, moving to the window. Outside, the Thames flowed gray and sluggish beneath a sky heavy with coming snow. "Your brother came to me with similar accusations 7 years ago," Blackthorne said quietly. "He believed I was manipulating trade routes, stealing from Valamont interests. He had ledgers, documents, conspiracy theories that would make your eyes spin." Caedric went very still. "What did you tell him?" "The same thing I am telling you. I am a businessman, Duke Valemont, a very successful one. But I do not need to steal from you. Your trade routes are insignificant compared to my larger enterprises. Then explain the ledger. Blackthorn turned from the window, and for the first time his smile disappeared entirely. I cannot. Because someone is using my name without my authorization. Someone who wants us at each other's throats rather than investigating the real corruption. He crossed to his desk, producing his own ledger. These are my authentic Yorkshire transactions. Different dates, different quantities. Someone created a parallel company using my name and has been operating for years without my knowledge. Caedric studied the second ledger. The handwriting was different. The signatures did not match. Who would have the access and motivation to do this? Someone who benefits from our mutual destruction, Blackthorn said. Someone who was threatened when your brother started asking questions. Someone who has been playing us both for fools while pocketing the profits. Caedric's jaw tightened. You expect me to believe you are innocent. I expect you to believe I am not stupid enough to steal from you so obviously. Blackthorn's eyes hardened. Your brother was murdered, Duke Valemont. Not by me, but by someone we both trusted. Someone close enough to your household to manipulate records, and close enough to mine to use my name. Then we find them, Caedric said flatly. Together. Blackthorn extended his hand. Agreed. Mutual enemies make strange allies, but effective ones. Caedric looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he shook it. As he left Blackthorn's study, his mind raced through possibilities. If Blackthorn was telling the truth, then the real enemy was still hidden. Someone in his household. Someone with access to trade records and shipping manifests. Someone who had killed Alexander to protect their secret and murdered Ashford when exposure became imminent. Someone he trusted. Caedric returned to his Mayfair residence as afternoon shadows lengthened across London. He found Isolde in the library, reading by firelight. She looked up as he entered. What did you learn? That we have been chasing the wrong enemy, Caedric replied grimly. Blackthorn did not kill Alexander, but someone wants us to believe he did. Then who? Someone close to me. Someone who has been manipulating both our houses for years. Isolde set down her book. Your steward. Caedric froze. What? Edmund Thorne. He delivers all your correspondence, manages your trade contracts, has access to every document in your estate. If someone needed to create false records and ensure you never questioned them. She trailed off, watching his face. Caedric's expression went absolutely cold. Edmund had been with House Valamont for 15 years. Loyal, efficient, beyond suspicion, or so he had believed. Where is he now? Isolde asked quietly. At the townhouse, managing affairs. Then we have one chance to catch him before he realizes we know. Caedric moved to the door, calling for his guard. But before leaving, he turned back to Isolde. If you are wrong, this will destroy an innocent man's life. And if I am right, she countered, how many more will die before you admit the enemy was beside you all along? Their eyes met across the library. Then Caedric nodded once and left to confront the man who might have murdered his brother. Edmund Thorne was found in Caedric's private study at the Mayfair residence, burning papers in the fireplace. He looked up as Caedric entered, and for just a moment, guilt flashed across his face before professional composure reasserted itself. Your Grace, I was merely disposing of old correspondence as instructed last month. Step away from the fire, Caedric said quietly. Something in his tone made Edmund freeze. Your Grace? Step away. Edmund moved slowly from the fireplace, and Caedric crossed to examine the papers. Half-burned shipping manifests, ledger pages, letters bearing the Blackthorn seal, all of it damning. You have been stealing from me for 7 years, Caedric said, voice eerily calm, creating false companies, manipulating trade routes, killing anyone who discovered the truth. Edmund's professional mask cracked. Your Grace, I can explain. My brother came to you 7 years ago with suspicions. You were the one person he trusted completely. So you arranged his disappearance and made certain the body was never found. I did not want to, Edmund whispered. Alexander was a good man, but he would not stop investigating. He would have ruined everything. So you murdered him. Edmund swallowed hard. It was quick, painless. I waited until he rode the North Road alone. One strike. He never saw it coming. The admission hung in the air like poison. Caedric did not move, did not blink. But the temperature in the room dropped until frost seemed to form on the windows. Why? he asked softly. Because you Valamonts take everything for granted, Edmund spat, sudden bitterness breaking through. Land, wealth, power, all handed to you by birth while men like me scrape and serve and smile and bow. I spent 15 years making you rich while earning pittance, so I took what should have been mine all along. You took my brother. Caedric moved then. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just 3 steps forward until he stood directly in front of Edmund. The steward tried to speak, but Caedric's hand shot out, closing around his throat. You killed Alexander, Caedric whispered. You murdered Lord Ashford. You stole years of my life and made me believe enemies where there were none. Edmund clawed at his hand, gasping for air. Caedric's grip tightened. For 7 years I have carried the weight of my brother's death. For 7 years I have trusted you completely. That trust ends now. He released Edmund suddenly, letting him collapse to the floor, gasping. Guards, Caedric called. 2 men entered immediately. Take him to the magistrate. Charge him with murder, theft, and treason. I want him hanged by week's end. As the guards dragged Edmund away, the steward looked back with desperate eyes. Your Grace, please. I served you faithfully for years. That has to count for something. Caedric stared at him with absolute emptiness. You served yourself. That is all that counts. Edmund was gone. The study fell silent, except for the crackling fire consuming the last of the evidence. Caedric stood alone, staring at the flames. He had his answer. He had his justice. But Alexander was still dead, and no amount of vengeance would change that. Isolde found him an hour later, still standing in the study. She entered quietly, closing the door behind her. They said you had him arrested. Caedric did not turn. He confessed everything. Alexander, Ashford, the stolen trade, all of it. Then it is over. No, Caedric said quietly. It is just beginning. He finally turned to face her, and Isolde saw something in his expression she had never witnessed before. Grief, raw, unfiltered, the kind that came from years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through the walls. I trusted him, Caedric said. My brother trusted him. Edmund was family in every way that mattered except blood, and he destroyed us for profit. Isolde crossed the room slowly. She did not offer platitudes, did not try to comfort with empty words. Instead, she simply stood beside him, solid and present. Your brother was right to trust someone, she said finally. He just chose the wrong person. But that does not make trust itself a mistake. Caedric looked at her. You barely knew Alexander. I knew him enough to understand he believed in you. Even when you pushed everyone away, even when you became the Duke of Shadows and ruled through fear, he still believed somewhere underneath his brother remained. She paused. Was he right? The question hung between them. Caedric studied her face. This woman who had walked into his frozen fortress with nothing but a compass and a story, who had stood beside him while he unraveled a conspiracy that had cost 2 lives, who saw him not as a duke or a weapon, but as something almost human. I do not know, he admitted. It was the first honest thing he had said to anyone in 7 years. Isolde smiled slightly. Then perhaps we find out together. Outside, London night descended over the city. Somewhere, Edmund Thorne sat in a cell awaiting execution. Somewhere, Yorkshire farmers struggled through another brutal winter. Somewhere, the Valamont Empire continued expanding through calculated ruthlessness. But in that quiet study, 2 damaged people stood side by side, and for the first time in recent memory, neither felt entirely alone. Then the door crashed open. Blackthorn strode in, face grim, followed by 2 of his men. We have a problem, he announced without preamble. Edmund was not working alone. Caedric tensed. Explain. My sources just uncovered another set of transactions. Larger, more sophisticated. Edmund was middle management. Valamont. Someone higher up the chain has been orchestrating this entire operation. Who? Blackthorn met his gaze steadily. Someone in Parliament. Someone with access to crown trade agreements. Someone who can make bodies disappear and rewrite records at the highest level. The implications crashed over Caedric like ice water. If Edmund was just a pawn, then the real enemy was still out there, still powerful, still dangerous, and now aware that Caedric was hunting them. Isolde moved beside Caedric, her voice cutting through his racing thoughts. Then we do not stop. We follow the trail until we find them, no matter where it leads. Caedric looked between Blackthorn and Isolde. One former enemy turned reluctant ally, one unexpected companion who had become something more, both staring at him with the same determined expression. He nodded slowly. "Then we go to war." Blackthorn smiled grimly. "About time." As the three of them began planning their next move, Caedric felt something shift inside his chest. Not warmth, exactly, but the absence of the cold that had ruled him for 7 years. Perhaps, he thought, there were worse things than learning to trust again, even if it meant risking the same betrayal that had destroyed him once before. The revelation of Edmund's treachery should have brought closure. Instead, it tore open an even darker truth. The conspiracy ran higher than anyone imagined. Someone in Parliament itself had orchestrated Alexander's murder. Someone powerful enough to manipulate crown trade agreements and make evidence vanish. As Caedric, Blackthorn, and Isolde prepared to hunt this hidden enemy, none of them knew that their investigation had already been noticed by the very person they sought. And that person had just made one critical decision. If the Duke of Shadows could not be controlled, he would have to be destroyed, along with anyone foolish enough to stand beside him. The war room in Caedric's Mayfair residence had not been used since his father's time. Dust covered the long table. Maps of England hung on walls like forgotten battle plans. Now 3 people stood around that table, and the air tasted like gunpowder before the first shot. Blackthorn spread documents across the surface with the precision of a man laying out chess pieces. These are every trade agreement signed in the last decade involving northern routes. Crown approved, Parliament sealed, all legitimate on the surface. Caedric studied the papers, his mind already working through layers of deception. "Show me the discrepancies." "Here," Blackthorn pointed to a shipping manifest dated 3 years prior. This agreement authorized tax exemptions for textile transport, but the actual cargo manifests show timber. Someone substituted goods after Crown approval. Isolde leaned closer, her finger tracing another document. "This signature, Lord Chancellor Whitmore. He appears on every agreement where the substitution occurred." Caedric went very still. "Whitmore has served 3 monarchs. He is untouchable." "Was untouchable," Blackthorn corrected. "Until now." The grandfather clock marked midnight with heavy chimes. Outside, London slept beneath a fresh layer of snow. Inside, 3 people planned the destruction of one of England's most powerful men. Caedric paced to the window, his reflection ghostly in the frost-covered glass. "If we move against Whitmore without absolute proof, he will crush us. The Crown will side with him. Parliament will close ranks. We will be branded traitors and hanged before spring." "Then we get absolute proof," Isolde said quietly. "How?" Blackthorn demanded. "The man keeps his secrets behind walls we cannot breach. He has guards, allies, the authority to make people disappear." Caedric turned from the window, and something in his expression made both of them pause. "We do not breach his walls. We make him come to us." Blackthorn raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Whitmore orchestrated this conspiracy to profit from stolen trade. He used Edmund as his instrument. Now Edmund is arrested, and Whitmore knows we are hunting the next link in the chain. He will be desperate to ensure no trail leads back to him. So we give him a target," Isolde said, understanding dawning. "Someone he believes knows too much. Someone he will move against personally." She met Caedric's gaze. "You want to use me as bait?" The word hung in the air like a blade. Caedric crossed back to the table. "Whitmore does not know you exist. As far as London is concerned, you are just another impoverished noble seeking patronage. We spread word that you possess Alexander's original letters, evidence that names his killer. Whitmore will have no choice but to silence you before that evidence reaches the Crown. And when he makes his move," Blackthorn continued, "we catch him in the act, with witnesses, documentation, everything needed to destroy him." Isolde looked between them. "You are asking me to paint a target on my back and wait for a man who has already killed twice to come for me." "Yes," Caedric said flatly. "I am." The honest brutality of it struck harder than lies would have. Isolde studied his face. The Duke of Shadows did not soften his request with comfort or apology. He simply laid out the truth and waited for her decision. Something inside her chest tightened. Not fear exactly, but recognition of the moment when safety ended and consequence began. "What happens if Whitmore succeeds?" she asked quietly. "What happens if your plan fails and I end up like Alexander?" Caedric held her gaze. Then I will burn London to find him, and he will pray for death long before I grant it. The promise was delivered without emotion, a simple statement of fact. Blackthorn cleared his throat. We will have guards positioned throughout the house, multiple escape routes. I will personally ensure— I am not asking for reassurance, Isolde interrupted. I am asking what this is worth. Not just to you, Caedric, to the people who died, to the ones still suffering because men like Whitmore believe power exempts them from consequence. She moved closer until she stood directly before the Duke. Your brother trusted the wrong person and paid with his life. I refuse to make his death meaningless by playing it safe now. So yes, I will be your bait. I will draw Whitmore out. And when we catch him, I want to watch his face when he realizes he underestimated a woman he considered beneath notice. Caedric almost smiled. Almost. Then we begin tomorrow. Blackthorn, spread word through your network that Lady Isolde possesses documents that will shake Parliament. Make it loud enough that Whitmore cannot ignore it. And you? Blackthorn asked. I will ensure she is seen at the right places, the right gatherings. Visible enough to seem vulnerable, but protected enough to make Whitmore believe he must strike quickly. The three of them stood around the war table, and for the first time since Edmund's arrest, Caedric felt something other than grief. Purpose. The kind that came from turning pain into action. The next 48 hours moved like a fever dream. Isolde was fitted with new dresses, emerald silk that made her look like old money instead of faded nobility. Blackthorn's people spread rumors through every club and drawing room in London. Lady Isolde Carrington possessed letters from the deceased Alexander Valamont, letters that named his killer, letters she planned to present to the crown within the week. By the second evening, all of London was whispering. Caedric escorted her to a political dinner at Lord Pemberton's estate. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and predatory ambition. Nobles circled each other like sharks testing blood in water. Isolde entered on Caedric's arm and conversation stuttered. The Duke of Shadows rarely attended social functions. When he did, people watched him the way they watched storms on the horizon. Lord Chancellor Whitmore stood near the far wall, surrounded by admirers. He was 60 years old, with silver hair and the kind of face that inspired trust. Grandfatherly, distinguished, the mask of a man who had spent decades perfecting the appearance of virtue. His eyes tracked Isolde the moment she entered. Caedric felt her tense beside him. Easy, he murmured. Let him look. Let him wonder. They moved through the crowd, Caedric making minimal conversation while Isolde played her role perfectly. Gracious, charming, just nervous enough to seem like someone carrying dangerous secrets. Whitmore approached after 20 minutes. Duke Valemont, he said warmly, extending his hand. What a pleasant surprise. I did not expect to see you at these gatherings. Caedric shook his hand briefly. Lord Chancellor, I am rarely in London long enough to accept invitations, but circumstances have changed. So I hear. Whitmore's gaze shifted to Isolde. And who is this lovely companion? Lady Isolde Carrington, Caedric introduced, a guest in my household. Whitmore took her hand, pressing it to his lips with practiced gallantry. Charmed, my lady. I do not believe we have met. No, my lord, Isolde replied smoothly. I have been in Yorkshire most recently, only just arrived in London. Yorkshire. How fascinating. Whitmore's smile never wavered, but his eyes sharpened. And what brings you to the capital during such harsh winter? Family matters, she said vaguely. Estate complications. The usual tedious business that follows death. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, my lord. Though some losses reveal truths that the living would prefer remained buried, the words landed like a knife between ribs. Whitmore's expression did not change, but Caedric felt the shift, the sudden focus, the predator recognizing prey. Truth can be dangerous, Lady Isolde, Whitmore said gently, especially in London. One must be careful what secrets one carries. I appreciate the advice, my lord. They parted moments later, but the damage was done. Whitmore knew. And now he would move. Caedric guided Isolde through the rest of the evening, maintaining appearances while his mind calculated next steps. They left after 2 hours, returning to the Mayfair residence under guard. Inside, Blackthorn waited with his men positioned throughout the house. He took one look at their faces. Whitmore made contact? He knows, Caedric confirmed, gave her a warning disguised as friendly advice. The strike will come within 24 hours. My men are ready, Blackthorn said. Every entrance watched, every corridor covered. Isolde removed her cloak, hands steady despite the weight of what she had just done. How will he attempt it? Caedric moved to the window, scanning the street below. Whitmore is too smart to act directly. He will send someone expendable, a thief, an assassin, someone who can be disavowed if caught. Then we wait, she said. Then we wait, he agreed. The house settled into tense silence. Guards changed shifts. Fires burned low. London night pressed against the windows like something alive. Isolde sat in the library, unable to sleep. She tried reading, but the words blurred. Tried focusing on the fire, but her mind raced with possibilities. Footsteps in the corridor made her look up. Caedric entered, still fully dressed despite the late hour. You should rest, he said. So should you. He moved to the liquor cabinet, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey, brought one to her without asking if she wanted it. She accepted the glass. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. Are you afraid? He asked quietly. Terrified, she admitted. But fear has not stopped me before. When did you become fearless? I did not. I just learned fear is only unbearable when you face it alone. Caedric studied her face in the firelight. This woman who had walked into his frozen fortress and somehow become the one person he trusted. Not because she was safe, but because she saw the darkness in him and did not flinch. Your brother would have liked you, he said. She smiled slightly. Would he have liked what you became? The question cut deeper than she probably intended. Caedric took a long drink. No. Alexander believed in honor, justice, the nobility of mercy. I believe in none of those things. You believed enough to spare Edmund's life when you could have killed him yourself. That was not mercy. That was efficiency. The magistrate's noose serves the same purpose as my hands without making me a murderer in the crown's eyes. Still, you chose law over vengeance. That would have mattered to him. Caedric looked at her. Would it matter to you? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was prepared to name. Yes, Isolde said finally. It would. Before Caedric could respond, glass shattered in the east wing. Both of them were on their feet instantly. Caedric grabbed her arm. Stay behind me. They moved into the corridor. Blackthorn appeared from the opposite direction, sword drawn. His men materialized from the shadows, converging on the source of the noise. The east drawing room door hung open. Cold air poured through the broken window. Snow gusted inside. Empty. Caedric scanned the room, every sense heightened. This was distraction. The real attack comes from another direction. He turned just as a figure dropped from the ceiling behind Isolde. The assassin wore black, face covered, blade already moving toward her throat. Caedric moved faster. He crashed into the assassin mid-strike, both of them hitting the floor hard. The blade skittered across stone. Caedric's fist connected with the man's jaw, once, twice, a third time until the assassin went limp. Blackthorn's men surrounded them, swords drawn. Secure him, Caedric ordered, climbing to his feet. I want him conscious and talking within the hour. He turned to Isolde. She stood pressed against the wall, breathing hard but unharmed. Are you hurt? She shook her head. No. You moved so fast, I barely saw... Because I will not lose anyone else to this conspiracy, he interrupted harshly. Do you understand? Not you, not Blackthorn, no one. The raw intensity of it stopped her breath. Then his hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. The gesture lasted 3 seconds, just long enough for both of them to acknowledge what was happening between them. Then he pulled away, the Duke of Shadows reasserting control. Take her to the upper rooms, he told Blackthorn. Post guards at the door. No one enters until I return. Where are you going? Isolde demanded. To make this assassin tell me everything he knows about Whitmore, and I will not be using gentle methods. He left before she could respond. The interrogation took place in the wine cellar. Stone walls, no windows, the kind of place where screams did not carry. The assassin was tied to a chair, face finally uncovered. He was younger than Caedric expected, maybe 25. Desperation and fear written across his features. Caedric stood before him, sleeves rolled up, hands already bruised from the earlier fight. Name, he said calmly. The assassin spat blood. Go to hell. Caedric did not react, just waited with the patience of a man who had all night. Blackthorn leaned against the wall, arms crossed. We can do this quickly or slowly. Your choice determines how much you suffer. I am not telling you anything. Caedric tilted his head slightly. You were sent to kill Lady Isolde. Someone paid you. Someone gave you access to this house. Someone promised you could escape cleanly. I want their name. Silence. Caedric moved closer until he loomed over the bound man. I have spent 7 years learning to be patient with betrayal. My brother's death taught me that anger is useless without focus. So when I hurt you, and I will hurt you, it will not be rage. It will be purpose. He picked up a knife from the table. Small, sharp, designed for precision rather than intimidation. I'm going to start with your fingers, he continued conversationally. Then move to your hands, then your arms. I will keep you conscious through all of it. And when you finally tell me what I want to know, I will ensure the magistrate understands you cooperated. A quick hanging instead of a slow one. That is the only mercy you will receive. The assassin's bravado cracked. You cannot do this. I have rights. The crown does not know you exist, Caedric interrupted. As far as London is concerned, you are just another corpse found in the Thames. No one is coming to save you. He let the words sink in. Then he pressed the knife against the assassin's smallest finger. Wait, the man gasped. Wait. God, please wait. Name, Caedric repeated. Whitmore. Lord Chancellor Whitmore. He paid me £500 to kill the woman and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. How did you gain access to this house? He gave me a key. Said one of the staff would leave the east window unlocked. Who? I do not know. I never met them. Everything was arranged through letters. Where are the letters? Burned. Whitmore's orders. Caedric lowered the knife, mind racing. A staff member was compromised, which meant the conspiracy ran deeper than Edmund. Whitmore had planted multiple assets inside Valamont operations over the years. Blackthorn pushed off the wall. This assassin is not enough to move against Whitmore directly. He will claim the man is lying, that we tortured a false confession. Caedric studied the bound assassin. Unless we catch Whitmore acknowledging the plot himself. How? Blackthorn demanded. The man will not confess. He is too smart to leave evidence. Then we force him into a position where silence becomes impossible. Caedric pulled the assassin's head back by his hair. You are going to write a letter to Whitmore. You are going to tell him the job is done. Lady Isolde is dead. You need final payment and extraction from London immediately. And if I refuse? Then I resume with the knife, and we find out exactly how many fingers you need to write. The assassin swallowed hard. I will write it. The letter reached Whitmore before dawn. Caedric had it delivered by one of Blackthorn's men disguised as a street courier. No return address. No signature. Just the coded message they had forced the assassin to write. The job is complete. The woman is gone. I need extraction tonight. Usual place. Then they waited. Isolde spent the day hidden in the upper rooms, pacing like a caged animal. She hated being sidelined, hated waiting while men made decisions about her fate. When Caedric finally came to her room in the afternoon, she confronted him immediately. What is the plan? He closed the door behind him. Whitmore received word that you are dead. He will arrange to meet his assassin tonight to pay him and ensure the man leaves London. We will be waiting. And then? Then we have witnesses, documentation, everything needed to bring him before the crown. She crossed her arms. You are using the assassin as bait now. He chose his profession. I am simply ensuring he serves a purpose before hanging. The cold pragmatism of it should have disturbed her. Instead, she found it oddly reassuring. This was who Caedric was, not a hero, not a villain, just a man who survived by turning every piece into a weapon. When this is over, she said quietly, what happens to us? The question caught him off guard. Us, he repeated. Do not pretend you have not noticed, Isolde said. Whatever this is between us, it is not just alliance. Not anymore. Caedric moved to the window, staring out at London's grey afternoon. I am not the man your novels describe, Isolde. I do not soften. I do not change. This darkness you see is not a mask. It is what 7 years of loss carved into me. I am not asking you to change. Then what are you asking? She crossed to stand beside him. I am asking if you will let me stand beside you when the darkness comes, because I have seen what you are capable of, and I am still here. He looked at her then. really looked. At the woman who had gambled everything on a duke who felt nothing, hoping to uncover truth that had already killed good men. She had stayed, not because she was naive, but because she was strong enough to survive his world without being destroyed by it. "Tonight," he said finally, "we finish this. After that, if you still want to stand beside me, I will not send you away." It was not a declaration of love, but coming from the Duke of Shadows, it was close enough. Midnight found them positioned in an abandoned warehouse near the Thames. The location was perfect for clandestine meetings. Multiple exits. No witnesses. The kind of place where powerful men conducted business they could not afford to have recorded. Caedric stood in the shadows with Blackthorn, both armed. Guards were positioned throughout the building. The assassin sat bound in the center of the space, visible to anyone who entered. Isolde had insisted on being present despite Caedric's objections. Now she waited with them, dressed in dark clothing, a knife strapped to her thigh. "If something goes wrong," Caedric had told her, "you run. Do not try to fight. Do not try to help. Just run." She had agreed, but they both knew she was lying. Footsteps echoed outside. Everyone tensed. The door opened. Lord Chancellor Whitmore entered alone, wrapped in a heavy cloak, face partially obscured. He saw the assassin and froze. Then he saw Caedric step from the shadows, and his expression went carefully blank. "Duke Valemont, what an unexpected pleasure." "Is it?" Caedric asked coldly. "Because it seems you were expecting someone else, someone you hired to murder a woman in my household." Whitmore's hand moved toward his cloak, but Blackthorn appeared behind him, sword drawn. "I would not," Duke Blackthorn said mildly. Whitmore went very still. "This is absurd. I came here following a letter requesting a meeting about trade negotiations." "Strange," Caedric said, "because the assassin you hired told me you would be here to pay him for killing Lady Isolde. Even stranger, you arrived at the exact time and location he specified." The Lord Chancellor's mask cracked. "You have no proof. The word of a criminal against mine. The crown will never—" Then Isolde stepped into the light. Whitmore's face went ashen. "Impossible. You are dead." "Not quite," she said, "though you tried very hard to make it happen." Whitmore stared at her like seeing a ghost made flesh. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. "You have no idea what you have interfered with, girl. This is larger than you, larger than your dead lover's conspiracy theories. Larger than anything you can comprehend. So enlighten us," Caedric said. "Tell us why you murdered my brother. Why you stole from both our houses. Why you orchestrated years of corruption. Because you Valamonts take everything," Whitmore spat, venom finally breaking through his polished facade. "Land, wealth, influence. You accumulate power and do nothing with it. Your brother was going to expose trade agreements that fund the Crown's operations. Operations that keep England stable. I did what was necessary to protect the realm. By stealing and murdering," Blackthorn demanded, "by ensuring resources went to those who would use them properly. The North is full of incompetent nobles playing at power. I redistributed their wealth to operations that actually matter. And profited along the way," Caedric added. "I earned compensation for my service. That is not theft. That is justice." The delusion was breathtaking. This man had killed Alexander, had murdered Ashford, had orchestrated years of conspiracy, and he genuinely believed himself righteous. Caedric felt cold fury settle over him like ice. "You will hang for this," he said quietly. "Every word you have spoken tonight has been witnessed, documented. The Crown will have no choice but to execute you." Whitmore laughed bitterly. "You think the Crown will believe you? I have served 3 monarchs. I am the Lord Chancellor. My word carries weight, yours never will." "Perhaps," Blackthorn said, "but His Majesty's spy master might disagree." A figure stepped from the darkness behind Whitmore. Sir Marcus Holloway, the King's most trusted intelligence officer. The man who operated in shadows even Caedric rarely glimpsed. "Lord Chancellor," Holloway said calmly, "you are under arrest for treason, murder, and corruption, by order of the Crown." Whitmore staggered. "No, this is impossible. You cannot—" "I already have," Holloway interrupted. "Every word of this conversation has been recorded. The King himself will read the transcript tomorrow morning." Guards appeared, surrounding Whitmore. The Lord Chancellor looked between them, reality finally penetrating his delusion. "I was protecting England." "You were protecting yourself," Holloway corrected. Take him. They dragged Whitmore away, his protests fading into the London night. Silence filled the warehouse. Caedric stood motionless, watching the space where Whitmore had been. 7 years. 7 years hunting the truth. And it ended in one night with the monster exposed and broken. It felt anticlimactic. Holloway approached. Duke Valemont. The Crown thanks you for your service. Your brother's death will be formally acknowledged and avenged. Alexander deserves more than acknowledgement, Caedric said flatly. The king is prepared to offer restitution. Land, title. Whatever you deem appropriate. I want reform. Every trade agreement Whitmore signed, reviewed, and audited. Every stolen pound returned to the families he robbed. Holloway nodded. It will be done. He turned to leave, then paused. Your brother was right about many things, Duke Valemont. But he was wrong about one. He believed you were lost to darkness. I think tonight proved otherwise. The spymaster vanished into the shadows, leaving Caedric, Blackthorn, and Isolde alone. Is it over? Isolde asked quietly. The conspiracy is over, Caedric said. Whitmore will hang. His network will be dismantled. The corruption ends. But Alexander is still dead. Ashford is still dead. 7 years are still gone. Victory does not restore what was taken. Blackthorn clapped his shoulder, which is why we honor them by living better than we did before. He left them alone, his guards following. Caedric and Isolde stood in the empty warehouse, snow beginning to fall through the broken roof. You did it, she said. You found the truth, made them pay. We did it, he corrected. You took a risk that could have killed you. Why? Because some things are worth the risk, she replied. Your brother understood that. I think you are starting to understand it too. Caedric looked at her. At the woman who had seen him at his worst and stayed anyway, who had walked into his darkness and somehow made it feel less suffocating. For 7 years he had believed love was weakness. Now, standing in the ruins of his vengeance, he wondered if perhaps love was the only thing strong enough to survive it. He took her hand. Come, let us leave this place. They walked out into the London night together, snow falling heavy around them. Behind them, the warehouse stood empty. A monument to conspiracy ended and justice achieved. But ahead of them, the city lights glowed warm against the winter darkness. And for the first time since Alexander's death, Caedric felt something other than cold fury in his chest. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The chance that perhaps the Duke of Shadows could become something other than the monster grief had created. Isolde squeezed his hand. Where do we go now? Home, he said. Back to Yorkshire. Back to Valamont Hall. And you are coming with me. As what? She asked. Guest? Asset? Something else? Caedric stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Snow caught in her dark hair. Her eyes reflected the street lamps. She looked fierce and beautiful and entirely unafraid. As someone I trust, he said. Someone I want beside me when I rebuild what Whitmore destroyed. Someone who reminds me that surviving is not the same as living. He paused. If you will have me. Isolde smiled. The Duke of Shadows asking instead of commanding. Progress. Do not get used to it, he warned. She kissed him then. Standing in the middle of a snow-covered London street, while the world slept around them. It was not soft or gentle. It was survival and defiance, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, two broken people could build something whole. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caedric rested his forehead against hers. I cannot promise I will change, he whispered. I cannot promise the darkness goes away. I am not asking for promises, she replied. I am asking for partnership, the real kind, where you do not carry everything alone anymore. Deal. They continued walking, hands intertwined, heading back toward the Mayfair residence. Behind them, London continued its eternal rhythm. Power shifted. Conspiracies ended. New ones began. But for Caedric Valemont and Isolde Carrington, the war was finally over. And what came next would be harder than any battle. Learning to live with victory. Learning to trust after betrayal. Learning that the strongest thing a man could do was not destroy his enemies, but choose who deserved his loyalty. As they reached the townhouse, Blackthorn waited by the door with a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. To Alexander, he said, pouring, who was right about everything except his brother's capacity for redemption. They drank in silence, honoring the dead and acknowledging the living. Then Blackthorn left them alone. Caedric and Isolde stood in the entrance hall, snow melting from their clothes, exhaustion finally catching up. "I should rest," she said. "Tomorrow we travel north." But she did not move. Neither did he. "Stay," Caedric said. "Not as a guest, not as an obligation. Just stay." Isolde looked up at him. At the Duke who had learned to ask instead of command, who had chosen justice over vengeance, who had let her see his grief without pretending it was strength. "Yes," she said simply. "I will stay." They climbed the stairs together, no longer two separate people navigating a conspiracy, but something new, something neither had expected to find in the frozen ruins of their lives. And as London night deepened toward dawn, the Duke of Shadows and the woman who had survived him began the hardest journey of all, learning to be human again. What? But 300 miles north, in a forgotten estate along the Scottish border, another player watched the downfall of Lord Chancellor Whitmore with cold calculation. This person had funded Whitmore's operation from the beginning, using him as a buffer between themselves and exposure. Now that buffer was gone, and the real architect of Alexander Valamont's murder remained hidden, untouched, and absolutely furious that Caedric had come so close to the truth, the conspiracy was not over. It had merely lost its first piece, and the endgame was about to begin. Yorkshire winter greeted them with the brutality of a judge passing sentence. The carriage struggled through snow-packed roads for 3 days before Valamont Hall emerged from the white landscape like a fortress carved from frozen stone. Isolde watched through frost-covered windows as the estate materialized, and despite everything that had happened in London, she felt her chest tighten with something close to relief. Home, she thought, then caught herself. When had she started thinking of this place as home? Caedric sat across from her, silent for most of the journey. Not the cold silence of their first meeting, but something heavier, contemplative, as if he was rebuilding himself piece by piece after Whitmore's exposure. The staff met them at the entrance, new faces mixed with familiar ones. Caedric had dismissed half the household after discovering Edmund's betrayal, unwilling to trust anyone who might have aided the conspiracy. "Your Grace," the new steward said, bowing deeply. "Welcome home. Everything has been prepared according to your instructions." "Thank you, Morrison. Have the documents from London arrived?" 3 crates. "Your Grace, in your study as requested." "Good. Lady Isolde will be taking the Duchess' suite. See that her belongings are transferred immediately." Morrison's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Grace." They entered the great hall, and Isolde felt the weight of centuries pressing down. This was not just a house. It was a dynasty made manifest. Every portrait, every stone, every shadow carried the accumulated power of generations who had ruled the North without mercy. And now she stood at its center, beside a man who had finally learned that power without purpose was just elaborate cruelty. "You are quiet," Caedric observed as they climbed the stairs. "I am tired," she admitted. 3 days in a carriage followed by the knowledge that we destroyed a Lord Chancellor tends to exhaust a person. He almost smiled. "We did not destroy him. We exposed him. There is a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I stand, Whitmore's life ended the moment we caught him. Whether by hanging or reputation, the result is the same." They reached the upper corridor. Caedric stopped outside the Duchess' suite, his hand on the door handle. "You're having second thoughts." It was not a question. Isolde met his gaze. "I am having human thoughts. Fear, doubt, the recognition that we gambled everything and barely survived. That is not the same as regret." "But it is close," he said quietly. She touched his face, thumb tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "I chose this, Caedric. I chose you. But that does not mean I am not terrified of what comes next." He caught her hand, pressing his lips to her palm. "What comes next is rest, recovery, rebuilding everything Whitmore tried to destroy. Together." The word hung between them like a promise neither had expected to make. Then Caedric opened the door to the Duchess' suite and left her to settle in. The first week passed in deceptive peace. Caedric spent long hours in his study, reviewing documents from London, trade agreements that needed renegotiation, families whose wealth had been stolen and needed restitution, the complex machinery of undoing years of corruption. Isolde found her place in the household naturally. She was not Duchess yet, but the staff treated her as such. consulting her on menus, seeking her opinion on household matters, small recognitions that she belonged here. At night, they dined together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with conversation that felt almost normal. But normal was a luxury neither truly trusted. On the 8th day, a letter arrived. Caedric was breaking his fast when Morrison brought it on a silver tray. Heavy parchment, sealed with unfamiliar wax. "Your Grace, this came by special courier." The man said it was urgent. Caedric broke the seal, his expression neutral as he read. Then his face went very still. Isolde set down her tea. "What is it?" He did not answer immediately, just read the letter twice more before setting it carefully on the table. "It appears our victory was premature." She felt ice form in her stomach. "Explain." Whitmore was not the architect. He was middle management. This letter is from someone claiming to be the true power behind the conspiracy. Someone who says they have been watching us very carefully. His voice remained calm, but Isolde heard the fury beneath. She picked up the letter, reading the elegant script. "Duke Valemont, congratulations on exposing Lord Chancellor Whitmore. It takes considerable skill to dismantle a conspiracy of that magnitude. Unfortunately, you have merely cut off one branch while the root remains untouched. I am that root. And unlike Whitmore, I do not make mistakes. Your brother discovered this truth 7 years ago. Lord Ashford learned it more recently. Now it is your turn. I will give you one opportunity to walk away, return to your frozen fortress, marry your little companion, live whatever life you can salvage, or continue investigating and discover that some enemies cannot be defeated. Only survived. You have until the new moon to decide. Choose wisely. The price of curiosity is higher than you imagine. No signature, no identifying marks, just a threat wrapped in courtesy." Isolde looked up at Caedric. His expression had gone absolutely cold. The Duke of Shadows returning in full force. "They are bluffing," she said, "trying to scare us into submission." Perhaps. Or perhaps Whitmore truly was just a tool, and whoever wielded him is still watching. "Then we find them," she said firmly. "We do not stop now." Caedric studied her face. "This is different from Whitmore, Isolde. This is someone who has remained hidden for 7 years. Someone smart enough to use a Lord Chancellor as a puppet without leaving traces. If we pursue this, we are walking into a trap we cannot see. Then we spring the trap and survive it. That is what we do." He almost smiled at her fierce determination, but something in his eyes remained troubled. "What are you not telling me?" she pressed. "That I'm starting to understand why Alexander stopped trusting people. Because the closer you get to power, the more you realize everyone is lying, including yourself." The bleak honesty of it cut deeper than comfort would have. They spent the next 3 days analyzing the letter for clues. Blackthorne arrived from London, bringing his own resources. The three of them worked late into the night, examining paper quality, ink composition, courier routes. Nothing. Whoever sent it had been extraordinarily careful. "We are missing something," Blackthorne said, pacing the study. "No one operates at this level without leaving traces. There has to be a pattern, a connection we are not seeing." Caedric stared at the map of England spread across his desk. Trade routes marked in red. Whitmore's holdings in blue. Areas where corruption had been confirmed in black. The black marks formed a pattern. Not random, but deliberate. All centered around 3 locations: London, Yorkshire, and one place they had not considered. "Scotland," he said quietly. "What?" Isolde leaned closer. "Every major theft, every manipulated agreement, every suspicious death. They all connect to trade routes running between England and Scotland. But we assumed the conspiracy was English." "You think the architect is Scottish?" Blackthorne asked. "I think the architect is someone who benefits from England and Scotland remaining economically divided. Someone who profits from controlling the border trade without oversight." Isolde felt pieces clicking into place. The northern families. The ones who control shipping across the border. They would have everything to gain from keeping both countries suspicious of each other. Exactly. And there is only one family with that kind of reach. He turned to face them, and something in his expression made the room feel colder. "The Greystones." Blackthorne went pale. "No. That is impossible. Lord Greystone is one of the Crown's closest advisors. His family has served England for generations. Which makes them the perfect cover," Caedric said. "No one would suspect a family that publicly loyal. But think about it. They control half the border trade. They have estates in both countries. They have access to Crown and Parliament records through their advisory positions. If Greystone is behind this, Isolde said slowly, then we are not just fighting a conspiracy. We are fighting one of the most powerful families in Britain. Yes, Caedric agreed, which is why the letter gave us an out. Walk away. Live quietly. Because exposing Greystone would require proof so absolute that not even the Crown could ignore it. And we do not have that proof, Blackthorn said. Not yet. The three of them looked at each other, understanding the magnitude of what they were considering. Then Morrison knocked on the door. Your Grace, you have visitors. Lord and Lady Greystone request an audience. They say it is urgent. The room went absolutely silent. Caedric's expression did not change. Show them to the drawing room. Tell them I will attend shortly. Morrison bowed and left. Blackthorn drew his sword halfway from its scabbard. This is a trap, obviously, Caedric said, but it is also an opportunity. They came here. That suggests either arrogance or desperation. Or both, Isolde added. Caedric straightened his jacket, every movement deliberate. Stay here, both of you. If I am not back in 20 minutes, assume the worst and ride for London. We are not leaving you, Isolde said flatly. You will, if I order it. She crossed her arms. Then do not order it. He looked at her, at the woman who had somehow become the thing he valued most in a life built on not valuing anything. Fine, but you stay armed. And if I give the signal, you run. No arguments. Agreed. The three of them descended to the drawing room together. Lord Marcus Greystone stood near the fireplace, tall and distinguished at 50 years old. Silver hair, sharp features, the kind of face that inspired confidence in Parliament and fear in enemies. Beside him, Lady Catherine Greystone was 15 years younger, beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. Duke Valemont, Lord Greystone said warmly, thank you for receiving us on such short notice. Caedric did not offer his hand. You are a long way from your estates, Lord Greystone. What brings you to Yorkshire in the dead of winter? Concern, Greystone said simply. We heard about the unfortunate business with Lord Chancellor Whitmore. Terrible tragedy. A man we all trusted revealed to be corrupt. Tragic indeed, Caedric replied, voice neutral. Lady Greystone moved closer, her smile calculated. We also heard you have taken a companion, Duke Valemont. Lady Isolde Carrington, if rumors are correct. How lovely for you both. Isolde felt the threat beneath the courtesy. This was assessment, cataloging weaknesses. Lady Greystone, she said evenly, your concern is noted but unnecessary. I assure you, we are quite well. Are you? Greystone asked. Because from where we stand, it appears you have stumbled into something far more dangerous than you realize. Enlighten me, Caedric said coldly. Greystone moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Whitmore was a fool, greedy, sloppy. He allowed his operations to become visible. We warned him repeatedly to exercise more caution, but he believed himself untouchable. He turned and his expression hardened. You exposed him brilliantly. Truly impressive work. But in doing so, you have created a problem. His network extended farther than you know. People who relied on those operations. People who now find their livelihoods threatened. People like you, Caedric said flatly. Greystone smiled. Like us, yes. We have been managing border trade for decades, ensuring goods flow efficiently, avoiding unnecessary taxation and regulation. Whitmore helped facilitate that arrangement by stealing from families and murdering anyone who investigated. Such an ugly way to phrase necessary business, Lady Greystone murmured. Blackthorn stepped forward, hand on his sword. You are admitting to conspiracy and murder in the Duke's own home. That requires either stupidity or confidence in protection we cannot provide. We have all the protection we need, Greystone said calmly, because Duke Valemont is about to make a very sensible decision. He produced a document from his jacket, placed it on the table between them. This is a contract, very simple terms. You cease all investigation into border trade operations. You accept a generous compensation for the losses your family suffered, and you live a long, prosperous life with your lovely companion. And if I refuse? Caedric asked. Then we demonstrate what happens to people who threaten our operations. Greystone snapped his fingers. The drawing room doors burst open. Armed men flooded in. 8 of them, swords drawn, faces covered. Blackthorn's sword cleared its scabbard, but he was immediately surrounded. Isolde reached for the knife strapped to her thigh, but Lady Greystone was faster, a blade appearing in her hand pressed against Isolde's throat. "Do not move, darling," Lady Greystone whispered. "This blade is poisoned. Even a scratch will kill you in minutes." Caedric went absolutely still. His eyes met Greystone's across the room. "You made a mistake coming here," he said quietly. "Did I?" Greystone asked. "Because from where I stand, I hold every advantage. Your ally is surrounded, your woman is seconds from death, and you are unarmed in your own home." He walked closer, each step deliberate. "Your brother made the same mistake you are making now. He believed righteousness would protect him. That truth mattered more than power. So we arranged his disappearance, made it look like an accident, and the world moved on." Caedric's expression remained carved from ice, but Isolde saw his hands tremble with barely contained rage. "Lord Ashford discovered our operations 6 months ago," Greystone continued. "He tried to blackmail us, so we arranged his suicide. Whitmore was always going to be exposed eventually. We simply ensured it happened in a way that did not trace back to us." He stopped directly in front of Caedric. "Now you have a choice, Duke Valemont. Sign the contract, walk away, live, or refuse, and watch everyone you care about die before we kill you last." The silence stretched. Caedric looked at Isolde, at the blade pressed against her throat, at the terror she was fighting to hide. Then he looked at Blackthorn, surrounded but defiant. Finally, he looked at Greystone. "If I sign, what guarantee do I have that you honor your word?" "None," Greystone said honestly. "But you have my word as a gentleman that if you cooperate, no harm comes to them tonight. After that, your compliance ensures their continued safety. So I become your prisoner, permanently. You become pragmatic. There are worse fates." Caedric picked up the document. "Read it slowly. Every word was a chain, every clause a cage." He looked at Isolde one more time. She shook her head fractionally. "Do not do this." But he saw what she could not. This was not surrender. This was strategy. He picked up the pen, signed his name with steady hands. Greystone smiled. "Wise decision, Duke Valemont." He gestured and his men lowered their weapons. Lady Greystone removed the blade from Isolde's throat. "We will be in touch regarding the specifics of our arrangement," Greystone said. "Do not attempt to contact the Crown or anyone else. We have people everywhere. Any sign of betrayal, and the woman dies first, then Blackthorn, then you." "Understood," Caedric said flatly. The Greystones left with their men, disappearing into the winter night. The moment the door closed, Isolde rounded on Caedric. "What have you done? You just gave them everything." "No," he said quietly. "I gave them the illusion of victory while buying time to destroy them properly." Blackthorn sheathed his sword, face grim. "That contract makes you complicit in their operations. If the Crown discovers it, you will hang alongside them." "Only if the Crown discovers it before I dismantle their entire network," Caedric replied. He moved to his desk, pulling out fresh parchment. "Morrison. Summon every loyal family head in Yorkshire. Tell them the Duke requests their presence for an emergency council. 3 days from now." "Your Grace," Morrison said uncertainly, "what are you planning?" "War," Caedric said simply. "But this time, we fight as the North united, not as individuals they can pick off one by one." The next 2 days were brutal preparation. Messages went out across Yorkshire, families who had suffered under Greystone's corruption, merchants whose businesses had been destroyed, nobles whose lands had been stolen through manipulated agreements. All of them received the same message. The Duke of Shadows is calling in every debt, every favor, every ounce of loyalty. Come armed. Come ready. Come prepared to take back what was stolen. Isolde watched Caedric transform, not into the cold Duke she had first met, but into something more dangerous, a leader who had learned that power was not about fear. It was about giving desperate people a reason to fight. "You are gambling everything," she said on the second night. "If this fails, Greystone will kill us all. If this fails, we were dead anyway," he replied. "At least this way we die fighting." She moved beside him at the desk. "I wish Alexander could see you now. He would not recognize me." "No," she said softly. "He would be proud." Caedric looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had walked into his fortress and somehow become the reason he remembered what fighting for something meant. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask you properly, with all the ceremony you deserve." "Ask me what?" to marry me, to be Duchess of Valamont, to stand beside me while we rebuild the North into something better than what our fathers left us." She smiled. "You are assuming we survive. I am assuming that if we do not, at least you know I intended to." Isolde kissed him then, long and desperate. The kind of kiss that carried the weight of everything unsaid. Then the first families began arriving. The Great Hall had not seen this many people in generations. 20 noble families, 50 merchants, hundreds of farmers and workers whose livelihoods had been destroyed by Greystone corruption, all crammed into Valamont Hall, waiting to hear what the Duke of Shadows had to say. Caedric stood at the front, Isolde on his right, Blackthorn on his left. He did not shout, did not perform, just spoke with the cold certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose. "For 7 years I have ruled through fear. I took what I wanted, destroyed who opposed me, built power without purpose. My brother died trying to stop me from becoming this, and I ignored him." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Then I learned the truth. The conspiracy that killed Alexander. The network that has been stealing from all of us. The enemy we thought was chaos was actually orchestration. And that enemy has a name. Greystone. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Lord Greystone believes he is untouchable, that his connections to the crown protect him, that we are too divided to fight back. He is wrong. Caedric's voice hardened. "I am calling in every favor I am owed, every debt unpaid, every grudge held. We are riding to Greystone Manor in 2 days. We are bringing evidence of every crime they committed, and we are presenting it to the crown together. United, undeniable." A merchant called out, "What if the crown refuses to act? What if Greystone's influence is too strong?" "Then we make it impossible to ignore. We bring witnesses, documentation, the victims themselves. We force the crown to choose between justice and complicity." "And if they choose complicity?" another voice asked. "Then we burn Greystone Manor to the ground and damn the consequences." The hall erupted, some in approval, some in shock. But all with the sudden recognition that the Duke of Shadows was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for all of them. The vote was unanimous. They would ride to war together. But that night, as Caedric reviewed final preparations, Morrison entered with his face ashen. "Your Grace, there has been a development. Speak, Lady Isolde is gone." The world stopped. Caedric was on his feet instantly. "What do you mean, gone? She left 2 hours ago. Alone. One of the stable boys saw her ride toward the east road. Why would she—" Then he saw the letter on his desk. His hands shook as he opened it. "Caedric, I am sorry. Greystone sent me a message. They have my cousin, the only family I have left. They will kill her unless I come alone. I cannot let another person die because of me. By the time you read this, I will be at Greystone Manor. Do not follow me. Do not try to rescue me. Use the time I buy you to gather your evidence and destroy them. Please, let me do this one thing that matters. Forgive me. Isolde." He read it 3 times. Then he roared. The sound was inhuman. Rage and grief and absolute fury compressed into one primal scream. Blackthorn burst into the room. "What happened? She went to Greystone, alone, to save her cousin." Blackthorn went pale. "That is a death sentence." "I know." Caedric grabbed his sword, called for his horse, started issuing orders with mechanical precision. But inside, something was breaking. She had saved him, and he had let her walk into certain death. The Duke of Shadows had learned to care. And caring, he realized, was the cruelest power of all, because it meant there were things worse than dying, like living with the knowledge you had failed the one person who believed you could change. He mounted his horse as dawn broke over Yorkshire. Behind him, an army assembled. Ahead, Greystone Manor waited. And somewhere inside those walls, Isolde faced the consequences of loving a man the world called heartless. The final battle was coming, and this time there would be no mercy, no negotiation, just blood and fire and the terrible reckoning of a duke who had finally learned what he was willing to destroy to protect what he loved. Isolde rode through the snow-covered countryside knowing she would not survive this. Greystone had no intention of releasing her cousin. This was a trap designed to remove the one person who made Caedric vulnerable. But as she approached the manor gates, she made peace with her choice. Some things were worth dying for. And if her death gave Caedric the rage he needed to finally burn this conspiracy to ash, then perhaps she could save him one last time, the way Alexander never got the chance to. Behind her, the Duke of Shadows gathered an army. Ahead, the architects of 7 years of suffering waited with chains already prepared. And between them, the last choice remained. Would Caedric become the monster everyone feared to save the woman who had shown him he was still human? Or would he choose justice over vengeance and let her die to preserve what she had fought to protect? The answer would determine not just their fate, but the future of the entire North. The ride to Greystone Manor took 6 hours through snow that fought them every mile. Caedric drove his horse harder than mercy allowed, and behind him an army of 200 men struggled to keep pace. Yorkshire nobles on horseback, merchants with weapons they barely knew how to use, farmers carrying pitchforks and generations of suppressed rage. This was not a proper military force. It was desperation given form and purpose. Blackthorn rode beside Caedric, both men silent as the winter landscape blurred past. There were no words adequate for what they were riding toward, no strategy that accounted for the variables they could not control. Isolde was inside those walls, either alive and suffering or already dead. Both possibilities felt like knives pressed against Caedric's ribs. He had spent 7 years building armor against emotion, turning himself into something cold and efficient, a weapon that never hesitated because weapons did not feel. Then she had walked into his frozen fortress and reminded him that being human meant carrying the constant threat of loss. And loss, he was learning, could break a man more thoroughly than any enemy. "Your Grace," one of the riders called from behind, "the horses cannot maintain this pace. We need to rest them." "No," Caedric said flatly. "We ride until we reach Greystone or the horses die beneath us. Those are the only options." The man fell silent. They rode on. Blackthorn finally spoke, his voice low enough that only Caedric heard. "When we arrive, what is the plan? Storm the manor? Demand her release? Present evidence to local magistrates? Caedric's jaw tightened. "I'm going to walk through the front door and kill every person who stands between me and Isolde. Then I'm going to drag Greystone before the crown in chains while his manor burns behind us. That is not a plan. That is suicide. Then consider it a very determined suicide." Blackthorn looked at his friend, at the Duke who had spent years hiding behind ice and control, now that ice was gone. Burned away by fury so absolute it left only the raw truth underneath. Caedric Valemont would destroy anything to save the woman he loved, including himself. "She knew this was a trap," Blackthorn said quietly. "She went anyway because she believed buying you time mattered more than her survival." "I know." "Then honor that choice. Do not throw away what she gave you by dying beside her. Use it. Destroy Greystone. Make her sacrifice mean something." Caedric turned to look at him, and Blackthorn felt his breath catch at what he saw in those pale eyes. Not cold calculation, not controlled fury, just grief, raw and devastating and utterly human. "If she dies, nothing will mean anything," Caedric said. "Not power, not justice, not the North or the crown or any of it. So we save her, or we burn the world trying." The conversation ended. They rode into the afternoon, the army trailing behind like a shadow stretching across the frozen land. And somewhere ahead, past the hills and forests, Greystone Manor waited with chains already prepared. Isolde regained consciousness in darkness. Her head throbbed. Wrists burned from rope cutting into skin. The air tasted like mold and old stone. A cell, she realized, underground, judging by the cold and damp. Memory returned in fragments, riding toward Greystone Manor, being intercepted by armed men before reaching the gates. A cloth pressed over her face, chemical sweetness flooding her lungs. Then nothing until now. She tested the ropes binding her wrists. Tight. Professional. No slack to exploit. Her ankles were similarly bound to the chair she sat in. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. A door opened. Torchlight flooded the cell. Lady Catherine Greystone entered, elegant even in this underground darkness. She wore riding clothes, her hair pulled back severely. Behind her, 2 guards stood with crossbows. "Lady Isolde," Catherine said warmly, "how kind of you to accept our invitation." "Where is my cousin?" Isolde demanded, her voice hoarse. Catherine smiled. "There is no cousin, darling. We sent that letter knowing you would come alone to save her, knowing you would sacrifice yourself rather than let Caedric gamble on rescuing you." She moved closer, circling Isolde like a predator examining prey. "You are precisely the weakness we needed. The Duke of Shadows might have resisted threats against himself, but threats against you? That breaks him in ways violence never could." Isolde spat at her feet. "He will come for me. And when he does, your family ends." "Oh, I am counting on him coming," Catherine replied. "In fact, we have prepared quite the welcome. 200 men waiting, crossbows positioned at every entrance, traps laid throughout the manor. Your duke will walk into a slaughter, and you will watch him die knowing you were the bait." The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but Isolde forced herself to meet Catherine's gaze without flinching. "You underestimate him. Caedric has spent 7 years becoming something you cannot comprehend. He does not negotiate. He does not compromise. He simply destroys everything in his path." "We shall see," Catherine said. "My husband is meeting with local magistrates as we speak, ensuring any accusations against us are dismissed as conspiracy theories from a disgraced duke. By tomorrow morning, Caedric Valemont will be branded a traitor and hunted by the crown itself." She paused at the door. "Enjoy these final hours, Lady Isolde. They are all you have left." The door slammed shut. Darkness returned. Isolde sat alone in the cold, testing the ropes again, finding no give, no weakness. She thought about Caedric, about the man who had learned to care in the worst possible moment, about Alexander who had died trying to expose this same corruption, about all the people who had fought for truth and lost. Then she stopped thinking and started working the ropes, because surrendering was not in her nature. And if she was going to die in this cell, she would at least die trying. Greystone Manor appeared through the snow like a fortress built for siege. Stone walls, guard towers, iron gates that had not opened in decades except to admit those the family wished to control or kill. Caedric reined his horse to a halt on the ridge overlooking the estate. Behind him, the army spread out. 200 people staring at the manor that represented everything wrong with the north. Blackthorn studied the defenses with a tactical eye. This is a death trap. Every approach is covered. Walls are too high for scaling. Gates too reinforced for ramming. "Good," Caedric said. "That means they expect us to hesitate, to negotiate, to waste time planning an assault that gives them opportunity to kill Isolde. So what do? We do not assault. We announce." He turned his horse facing the army. His voice carried across the ridge with absolute clarity. "Every person here has suffered because of Greystone corruption. Stolen wealth, murdered family, lives destroyed by men who believed power exempted them from consequence. Today, that ends." He pointed at the manor. "I am riding to those gates, alone. I am going to demand they release Lady Isolde and surrender to Crown Justice. They will refuse. They will threaten. They will believe I am negotiating." He paused. "While I distract them, Blackthorn will lead teams to 3 entry points we identified from the old manor plans. Servants' entrance, supply tunnel, chapel access. You move fast. You move silent. And when I give the signal, you flood that manor and drag every Greystone bastard into the light." "What is the signal?" someone called. "You will know it when it happens." Caedric dismounted, began removing his heavy riding coat, his weapons belt, everything that would slow him down. "Your Grace," Blackthorn protested, "you cannot walk in there unarmed. Watch me." He kept only a single knife, small, easily concealed, the kind of weapon that required getting very close to use. Then he walked toward the manor gates alone. Behind him, Blackthorn organized the teams with frantic efficiency. Merchants who knew the supply tunnels from years of deliveries. Servants who had worked in Greystone households and remembered the layouts. Nobles who brought lockpicks and climbing equipment. An army built from broken people becoming dangerous. Caedric reached the gates and hammered his fist against the iron. The sound echoed like cannon fire. A guard appeared atop the wall. "Who goes there?" "Duke Caedric Valemont." "Tell your lord I wish to discuss terms." The guard disappeared. Caedric stood in the snow, hands visible at his sides, making himself the most vulnerable target imaginable. Every instinct screamed at him to find cover. But vulnerability was the strategy, because predators always approached exposed prey. The gates opened with grinding reluctance. Lord Marcus Greystone stood in the courtyard, flanked by 30 armed men, crossbows aimed, swords drawn. "Duke Valemont," he called. How unexpected, and how extraordinarily foolish. Caedric walked through the gates, stopped 20 feet from Greystone, close enough to talk, far enough to move if needed. I am here for Lady Isolde. Release her, surrender to Crown authority, and I will ensure your execution is quick rather than prolonged. Greystone laughed. You ride here with farmers and merchants pretending to be soldiers. You walk into my fortress unarmed and alone. And you believe you have leverage? I have the truth. Documented evidence of every crime your family committed. Witnesses prepared to testify before the Crown. You are finished, Greystone. This is your only chance to die with minimal suffering. The Lord's expression hardened. Your woman is in my dungeons, chained, waiting. If you surrender now, I might let you see her before we execute you both. Caedric's face remained carved from ice, but inside relief crashed through him. She was alive. Hurt, probably. Terrified, certainly. But alive meant rescuable. Take me to her, he said. Greystone smiled. With pleasure. They moved through the courtyard toward the manor entrance. Caedric walked surrounded by armed men, each one waiting for the order to kill him. He counted guards, noted weapon positions, calculated distances and angles, the kind of mathematics that separated survival from suicide. They descended stone stairs into underground corridors. Torches cast writhing shadows. The air grew colder with each step. Caedric felt his pulse slow, the frantic urgency giving way to something colder. This was the place where control mattered more than emotion, where one wrong move meant death for both of them. They reached a heavy wooden door. Greystone unlocked it personally. Inside, Isolde sat bound to a chair, her face bruised but defiant. Her eyes met Caedric's across the cell, and in that moment, everything he had built in 7 years, the armor, the control, the ruthless efficiency, all of it shattered completely. Because seeing her hurt made him understand Alexander's final truth. Some things were worth dying for. And love, terrible and consuming and utterly irrational, was the only thing that made dying feel like choice instead of surrender. Isolde, he said quietly. You should not have come, she replied, voice shaking. This is exactly what they wanted. I know. He looked at Greystone. Release her, now. The Lord laughed. Or what, Duke Valemont? You are surrounded, unarmed, helpless. You have no leverage, no power, nothing but misplaced affection for a woman who walked willingly into our trap. Caedric smiled then. It was not a pleasant expression. You are right about one thing, he said. I am helpless, which means I have nothing left to lose. He raised his hand toward the small window high in the cell wall. Outside, barely visible through the glass, a fire arrow streaked across the evening sky. The signal. Greystone's face went pale. What have you done? Caedric's smile widened. I brought an army, but more importantly, I brought people who know every secret entrance to this manor, every weak point, every escape route. Right now, they're flooding through your walls like water through cracks in stone. Distant shouts echoed through the manor, steel clashing against steel, the sound of doors being breached. Greystone drew his sword. Kill him. Kill them both. The guards moved forward. Caedric drew his concealed knife in one smooth motion and threw himself at the nearest man. The blade found throat. Blood sprayed hot against his face. He ripped the guard's sword free before the body hit ground. Then he became something his years of control had been containing. Not the Duke of Shadows. Just a man fighting for the only thing that mattered. The cell erupted into violence. Caedric moved through guards with brutal efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Each strike calculated to kill or cripple. He took a crossbow bolt in the shoulder. Barely felt it. Kept moving. Another guard fell. Then another. Blood pooled on stone floors while Caedric carved a path toward Isolde. Greystone retreated toward the door, screaming for reinforcements. But the sounds from above suggested reinforcements were occupied. Blackthorn's forces had breached the manor. Caedric reached Isolde's chair, cutting her bonds with hands slick with blood. Can you walk? He demanded. Yes. She stood unsteadily. Behind you. He spun, blocked a sword strike from the last remaining guard. Countered. The man collapsed. Then Greystone was gone. Fled into the corridors. Caedric started after him, but Isolde grabbed his arm. Let him go. We need to get out before... The door exploded inward. Blackthorn appeared with 20 men, all bloodied from fighting above. The manor is ours, he announced. Greystone's men are surrendering or dead, but Marcus escaped through a back passage. He is heading for the stables. Caedric looked at Isolde. Can you make it upstairs? She nodded. Go, finish this. He kissed her once, hard and desperate, and then ran after Greystone with Blackthorn following. They burst into the courtyard to see the Lord already mounted, galloping toward the gates. Caedric grabbed a horse, ignored the pain in his shoulder, mounted and kicked the animal into pursuit. The winter night had descended fully now. Snow fell heavy. Visibility dropped to yards. Greystone's horse disappeared into the forest beyond the manor. Caedric followed. Trees whipped past, branches clawed at his face. The horse stumbled on hidden roots but kept running. Ahead, Greystone's mount broke through to a clearing. The Lord reined to a halt, turned his horse to face Caedric, both men breathing hard, both bloodied, both knowing this ended here. You have destroyed everything, Greystone shouted. My family, my operations. 7 years of careful work ruined by one stubborn duke who could not accept his place. My place, Caedric said coldly, is standing over the bodies of men who believe power exempts them from consequence. You killed my brother. You tortured the woman I love. You corrupted an entire region for profit. He dismounted slowly. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to end you. Greystone drew his sword. Then come and try, boy. I was killing men before you were born. They circled each other in the snow. 2 predators. 1 fight. Then Greystone attacked. The older man was skilled, decades of experience showing in every parry encounter. He drove Caedric back toward the tree line, but Caedric was not fighting with skill. He was fighting with absolute fury barely contained. The crossbow bolt in his shoulder screamed with each movement. Blood loss made the world tilt, but he pressed forward anyway, because stopping meant losing, and losing meant Isolde suffered for nothing. Their swords met with ringing impact, once, twice, 3 times. Greystone was tiring, age catching up to technique. Caedric saw the opening and took it. His blade slipped past Greystone's guard, found ribs, drove deep. The Lord gasped, staggered backward. His sword fell from nerveless fingers. He looked at Caedric with genuine surprise. You were supposed to be weak, civilized, controlled. I was, Caedric said. Then you took the only person who made control feel like strength instead of cowardice. Greystone collapsed to his knees, blood staining the snow black. My family, he wheezed. You cannot destroy all of us. The network is too large, too entrenched. Watch me. Caedric raised his sword for the final strike. Then hoofbeats thundered through the forest. A full company of crowned soldiers emerged from the trees, led by Sir Marcus Holloway himself. Duke Valemont, Holloway called. Step away from Lord Greystone. Caedric did not lower his sword. This man orchestrated my brother's murder, tortured innocent people, corrupted crown trade for personal profit. I know, Holloway said, which is why the king sent me to arrest him formally. But if you kill him here, you become a murderer in the crown's eyes. Let us take him. Let him face trial and execution properly. Caedric stared at the dying lord bleeding in the snow. Every instinct demanded he finish it. 7 years of rage focused on this single moment. But he heard Isolde's voice in his memory. Do not become him. Slowly, Caedric lowered his sword. Take him, he said. Try him. Hang him. But make sure he understands why he dies. Not because I am stronger, but because truth eventually finds men who believe they are untouchable. Holloway's soldiers moved forward, securing Greystone. The Lord looked up at Caedric with hatred and grudging respect. You could have been like us, he whispered. Powerful. Wealthy. Above consequence. No, Caedric replied. I could have remained like you, but someone showed me there are things worth more than power. He turned his horse back toward the manor. Behind him, crowned soldiers dragged Greystone away to face justice. The snow continued falling, covering the blood, erasing the evidence of violence. But Caedric would carry the scars forever, physical ones from the crossbow bolt and sword cuts, and deeper ones from learning that caring meant accepting the constant threat of loss. He rode back to find Isolde waiting in the courtyard, surrounded by Blackthorn and the army that had followed him into battle. She ran to him as he dismounted, caught him as he staggered from blood loss. You are hurt, she said. I am alive, he corrected. We both are. That is all that matters. She held him while the world tilted and his vision blurred. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was her face. Bruised, terrified, beautiful, and completely, impossibly his. Apas. Caedric woke 3 days later in his own bed at Valamont Hall. Morning light streamed through windows. His shoulder was bandaged. Body ached in a dozen places. But he was alive. Isolde sat in a chair beside the bed, reading. She looked up when he stirred. "Welcome back," she said softly. "How long?" 3 days. The physician said you lost enough blood to kill most men, but apparently dukes are too stubborn to die. He almost smiled. "What happened after—" "Everything," she interrupted. Greystone was arrested. His wife and associates seized. The Crown launched investigations into every family connected to the conspiracy. Trials are scheduled for spring. She set down her book, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "You did it, Caedric. You destroyed the network, avenged your brother, saved the North from decades more corruption." "We did it," he corrected. "You walked into a trap to buy me time. That matters more than anything I did after." "I would do it again," she said simply. "I know. That terrifies me." "Good. You should be terrified. Love is the most dangerous thing people like us can feel." He caught her hand, pulling her closer until she lay beside him on the bed. "Marry me," he said. "Not because strategy demands it, not because our families require it, but because I would rather face danger with you than safety alone." Isolde smiled. "That might be the least romantic proposal in English history." "Probably. I am not practiced at this." She kissed him gently, careful of his injuries. "Yes, Caedric. I will marry you. I will stand beside you while we rebuild. I will argue with you when you are wrong, and I will remind you every day that being the Duke of Shadows does not mean living in darkness." He held her, feeling something in his chest unclench for the first time in 7 years. Not peace exactly, but the absence of the constant battle against himself. A knock interrupted them. Blackthorn entered without waiting for permission. "You are awake." "Excellent, because we have a problem." Caedric sat up carefully. "What now?" "News from London. Lady Catherine Greystone escaped custody during transport, vanished completely. No one knows where she went." Isolde went pale. "She swore she would make us suffer for destroying her family." Blackthorn nodded grimly. "And Catherine is more dangerous than her husband ever was. Marcus was the strategist. She was the killer." Caedric felt exhaustion give way to alertness. Where would she go? If she is smart, anywhere but England. But if she wants revenge, then she comes here, Caedric finished, to finish what her family started. The three of them looked at each other. Outside, Yorkshire continued its eternal winter. The North was free from Greystone corruption. The conspiracy was broken. But one piece remained, and that piece was hunting them now. Isolde touched Caedric's face. "We survived Whitmore. We survived Greystone. We will survive her too." He covered her hand with his. "Together." "Together," she agreed. Blackthorn moved to the window, scanning the grounds below. "I will post additional guards. Secure the perimeter. She will not get close without us knowing." "Do it," Caedric ordered, "and send word to every family that aided us. Catherine will target them as well. We protect everyone, or we protect no one." As Blackthorn left to organize defenses, Caedric stood slowly. His shoulder screamed protest, but he ignored it. Isolde steadied him. "You should rest. I should prepare. Catherine Greystone is not her husband. She will not make the same mistakes. She will wait. Plan. Strike when we believe we are safe. Then we stay vigilant," Isolde said. "And we make her understand that we are not the frightened people her family tried to break." Caedric looked at her, at the woman who had walked into his fortress and somehow become the reason he remembered what fighting for something meant, at the woman who would soon be his wife, at the target Catherine would focus on first. And in that moment, he made a choice that would have horrified the Duke he used to be. If Catherine came for them, he would not hide Isolde away. He would not treat her as weakness to protect. He would stand beside her and trust that together they were stronger than any enemy alone. Because that was what love meant. Not removing danger, but facing it as equals. Outside, the wind howled against Valamont Hall. Somewhere in England, Catherine Greystone planned her revenge. And inside those stone walls, two people who had survived conspiracy and betrayal prepared for one final battle. Not for power, not for justice, but for the future they had fought so hard to build. 3 weeks later, on the eve of their wedding, Isolde stood at the chapel entrance, wearing a dress the color of winter sky. Behind her, every noble family in Yorkshire waited to witness the union of the Duke of Shadows and the woman who had tamed him. But as she reached for the door, she felt cold steel press against her spine. A woman's voice whispered in her ear, "Turn around slowly, Lady Isolde. Walk toward the west exit. Scream, and the blade goes through your heart before the sound leaves your throat." Catherine Greystone had returned, and she had chosen the one moment when Caedric would be most vulnerable, when he believed the danger had finally passed. Inside the chapel, the Duke waited at the altar, unaware that his future was being stolen again. This time by an enemy who understood that the cruelest revenge was not killing your target, but making them live with the knowledge they had failed to protect what they loved most. Isolde felt the blade press harder against her spine as Catherine Greystone forced her toward the west exit of the chapel. Every instinct screamed to fight, to scream, to alert the 200 guests waiting inside. But Catherine was not bluffing. The woman had lost everything: family, fortune, future. People with nothing left were the most dangerous kind because they stopped calculating consequences. "Walk," Catherine whispered, slowly. "Smile if anyone looks at you." They moved through the corridor adjacent to the chapel. Servants hurried past carrying flowers and wine, too focused on wedding preparations to notice the blade concealed beneath Catherine's cloak. Isolde's mind raced through options. All of them ended with blood. They reached a side door leading to the gardens. Catherine shoved her through into the winter afternoon. Snow covered everything. The carefully maintained gardens looked like a graveyard draped in white silk. "Keep moving," Catherine ordered, "toward the stables." "Why are you doing this?" Isolde asked, voice steady despite the terror clawing inside her chest. "Your husband is awaiting execution. Your family is destroyed. Killing me changes nothing." Catherine laughed bitterly. "It changes everything. Because the Duke of Shadows believes he won. Believes he destroyed us and gets to live happily with his pretty little wife. I'm going to teach him what loss actually means." They crossed the gardens toward the stable buildings. Isolde calculated distances. Guards were positioned at the main gates, but the stables were a blind spot in the defenses. Catherine had planned this perfectly. Inside the chapel, Caedric stood at the altar waiting. He wore black as always, but the severity was softened by a single white rose pinned to his jacket. Isolde's choice during their planning last week. A compromise, she had called it. "You can keep your darkness. Just let a little light in occasionally." He had agreed because denying her anything had become impossible. Now he waited while guests settled into pews. Yorkshire nobles dressed in their finest, merchants who had fought beside him at Greystone Manor, families whose lives had been restored after the conspiracy's destruction. All of them here to witness something unprecedented. The Duke of Shadows learning to be human again. Blackthorn stood beside him as best man, looking uncomfortable in formal clothing. "She is late," Blackthorn observed. Caedric checked the time. "Only by 10 minutes. Women take longer to prepare for these things. Since when do you know anything about women?" "Since I fell in love with one." The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign but not unwelcome, like learning a language that had been buried under years of ice. A commotion near the chapel entrance made both men turn. Morrison the steward rushed in, face pale. "Your Grace, Lady Isolde is not in her preparation room. The maids searched everywhere. She is gone." Caedric went absolutely still. "Gone. Explain gone." "No one has seen her since she left to dress. The window in her room was open. Footprints in the snow leading toward the gardens." The chapel erupted into whispers. Caedric silenced them with one look. Then he turned to Blackthorn. "Catherine." The name landed like a stone in deep water. Blackthorn's hand went to his sword. "We secured the perimeter. How did she—" "Through the gardens," Caedric interrupted. "The one blind spot we left uncovered because we believed she would strike directly at me, not her." He was already moving toward the exit, guests scrambling out of his way. "Morrison, organize search parties." "Blackthorn, with me. Every second we waste is another second Catherine has to—" "To what? Kill Isolde immediately? Or use her to draw me into a trap?" The question hung unanswered as they burst into the winter afternoon. Fresh footprints led through the gardens. 2 sets. One steady and controlled. One showing signs of resistance. Caedric followed the trail with his heart hammering against his ribs in a way it had not done since childhood. Fear was not an emotion he entertained often, but the possibility of losing Isolde made fear feel less like weakness and more like the only reasonable response to reality. They reached the stables to find them apparently empty. Too empty. Caedric drew his sword, gestured for Blackthorn to circle around the back entrance. Then he stepped inside. The interior was dark despite the afternoon sun. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls. Dust particles danced in the few shafts of light penetrating the gloom. "Catherine," he called, "I know you're here. Show yourself." Silence. Then movement in the shadows near the back. Catherine emerged, holding Isolde with one arm while the blade pressed against her throat with the other. "Duke Valemont," Catherine said coldly. "How kind of you to join us. And so quickly, too. I expected you to waste time organizing your men." "I am past wasting time on strategy," Caedric replied. "Release her, now." "Or what? You will kill me?" "I welcome death, Duke. I have nothing left except the satisfaction of taking your happiness with me." She pressed the blade harder. A thin line of blood appeared on Isolde's throat. Caedric forced himself not to react, not to show the absolute terror screaming through his veins, because predators attacked weakness. And right now, weakness would get Isolde killed. "What do you want?" he asked. "Name your terms." "Terms?" Catherine repeated, almost laughing. "You think this is negotiation? You destroyed my family, killed my husband, stripped away everything I spent decades building. There are no terms, only vengeance." "Then kill me," Caedric said flatly. "Let Isolde go. Take my life instead." Isolde made a sound of protest, but Catherine tightened her grip. "How noble," Catherine mocked. "The Duke of Shadows sacrificing himself. But that is too easy. Death is a mercy compared to what you deserve." She shifted position slightly, and in that moment, Caedric saw what she intended. Catherine was not going to kill Isolde. She was going to force him to watch as she hurt Isolde slowly, methodically, breaking the woman he loved piece by piece while he stood helpless. It was the cruelest revenge imaginable, and it was working. Caedric felt something inside him fracture. The control he had built over 7 years cracking like ice under impossible pressure. He had survived his brother's death by becoming cold. He had survived betrayal by trusting no one. But he could not survive watching Isolde suffer. So he made a choice that would have horrified the Duke he used to be. He set down his sword. "Take me," he said quietly. "Whatever you plan to do to her, do it to me instead. Hurt me. Break me. Kill me slowly if that is what you need. Just let her walk out of here alive." "Caedric," Isolde whispered. "No." He ignored her, kept his eyes locked on Catherine. "You want me to understand loss? I understand. I have lived with it for 7 years. The difference is this time I am choosing what I lose." He took a step forward, hands raised, completely vulnerable. "So here I am, Catherine, unarmed, unprotected, yours to destroy however you see fit. Take your revenge on the person who actually deserves it." For the first time, Catherine hesitated. She had expected rage, violence, the Duke of Shadows trying to overwhelm her with force. Instead, he was offering surrender. And surrender from a man like Caedric Valemont was more unsettling than any threat. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you trade your life for hers? She is just a woman. You could find another." Caedric smiled sadly. "Because love is the only thing I have found worth dying for. Power does not matter. Vengeance does not matter. Nothing matters except protecting the person who made me remember I was human." He took another step closer. "So do it, Catherine. Kill me. Let Isolde live with the memory of watching me die. Make her carry that weight. Is that not revenge enough?" Catherine's blade wavered. Behind her, Blackthorn appeared in the rear entrance, moving silently through shadows. But Caedric shook his head fractionally. "Wait." Because this was not the moment for violence. This was the moment for Catherine to choose. Revenge or mercy. Becoming the monster she hated or accepting that destruction did not heal wounds. "I loved my husband," Catherine said, and her voice broke. "Not because he was good, but because he was mine. You took that from me." "I know," Caedric said gently. "Just as Whitmore took my brother from me. Just as your family took years from innocent people. We have all lost something. The question is whether we let loss define us or release us." Catherine stared at him. At this man who had destroyed her family and now stood offering his life without condition. At this Duke who had spent years being ruthless and was choosing vulnerability at the worst possible moment, and something in her expression shifted, not forgiveness, but exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying hatred until it became heavier than grief. She lowered the blade slowly. Isolde stumbled forward and Caedric caught her, pulling her behind him in one smooth motion. Catherine stood alone now, weapon hanging loose in her hand, all the fury drained away, leaving only hollow emptiness. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "No family, no home, nothing." "Then choose what comes next," Caedric said. "You can die here, quickly. Blackthorn will ensure it is painless. Or you can surrender to Crown authority, face trial, accept whatever punishment they decree. Neither option is pleasant, but one at least gives you time to decide who you want to be when the rage finally burns out." Catherine looked at the blade in her hand. For a long moment, Caedric thought she would turn it on herself. Then she dropped it to the stable floor with a clatter that echoed through the silence. "I surrender," she said. "Take me. Try me. Hang me if you must. I am too tired to fight anymore." Blackthorn moved forward, securing her hands gently but firmly. As they led Catherine away, she stopped beside Caedric. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "Neither are you," he replied. She almost smiled. "Perhaps in another life, Duke Valemont, we could have been allies instead of enemies. Perhaps, but we got to this life instead, and we both did terrible things with it." "Yes," she looked at Isolde. "Treat her better than my husband treated me. That is the only revenge that actually matters." Then she was gone, led away by guards to await trial and whatever came after. The stable fell quiet except for horses shifting nervously. Caedric turned to Isolde, his hands shaking as he touched her face, checking for injuries beyond the shallow cut on her throat. "You should have let me fight," she said. "You could have died," he interrupted harshly. "And I would have burned the world down finding ways to blame myself." "So you offered yourself instead?" "Yes. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I have ever witnessed." He pulled her close, breathing in the reality of her alive and whole, and still his. "I am learning," he said against her hair, "that being brave is just stupidity that happens to work out." She laughed despite everything, wrapped her arms around him, felt his heart hammering against her cheek. For several minutes, they just stood there while the afternoon light slanted through gaps in the stable walls. Two people who had survived conspiracy and betrayal, and one final confrontation learning what it felt like when the fighting finally stopped. "We should probably return to the wedding," Isolde said eventually. Caedric pulled back to look at her. "Do you still want to? After everything?" She touched his face. "I walked into your frozen fortress with nothing but a compass and a story. I have survived assassination attempts, torture, kidnapping, and more near-death experiences than any reasonable person should. You think a little wedding day drama is going to scare me off? When you phrase it that way, I suppose not. Besides," she added, 200 guests are waiting. The food is already prepared, and I refuse to let Catherine Greystone ruin what is supposed to be the second best day of my life." "Second best? The best will be 50 years from now, when we are old and gray and still arguing about whether you brood too much." "I do not brood," he protested. "You are brooding right now about whether I am making a joke." He almost smiled. "Fine. I brood occasionally, but only when circumstances warrant." They walked back toward the chapel hand in hand, leaving bloodstains and trauma in the stable behind them. Because that was what survival meant. Not erasing the past, but refusing to let it dictate the future. Mike. The wedding ceremony happened 2 hours later than scheduled. Isolde changed into a fresh dress. The cut on her throat was bandaged and hidden beneath lace. Her hand shook slightly as she walked down the aisle, but her spine remained straight. Caedric watched her approach, and for a man who had spent 7 years feeling nothing, the surge of emotion nearly overwhelmed him. She had chosen him. Not the Duke, not the title, not the power. Just the broken man underneath who was learning slowly and painfully how to care again. When she reached the altar, he took her hands. The officiant began the ceremony, but Caedric barely heard the words. His attention focused entirely on Isolde's face, on the woman who had survived his darkness without being consumed. The vows came eventually. Traditional words about love and loyalty and forever, Caedric spoke them clearly, meaning every syllable in ways he had never imagined possible. When Isolde said her vows, her voice carried through the chapel with fierce determination. Not pretty promises about happiness, but honest acknowledgement that they would face more storms, more enemies, more moments when survival felt impossible, and the commitment to face them together anyway. The officiant declared them married. Caedric kissed his wife with the desperate relief of a man who had bet everything on one final gamble and somehow won. The chapel erupted in applause. Blackthorn grinned. Yorkshire nobles wept. Merchants cheered. Even the servants smiled from their positions along the walls. Because tonight was not just a wedding. It was proof that the Duke of Shadows could become something other than the monster grief had created. The celebration afterward lasted deep into the night. Music played, wine flowed. People danced despite the winter cold pressing against the manor walls. Caedric stood near the fireplace, watching his wife move through the crowd. She laughed with merchants, discussed politics with nobles, made everyone feel seen in the way only genuine kindness could manage. Alexander would have loved her, he thought. The grief of that realization no longer felt like knives, just bittersweet acknowledgement that some wounds never fully healed. They just became part of who you were. Blackthorn appeared beside him, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. To survival, he said, offering one. Caedric accepted. To surviving despite ourselves. They drank in silence for a moment. What happens now? Blackthorn asked. The conspiracy is destroyed. Catherine is imprisoned. Greystone faces execution. You have the wife, the power, the future. What does the Duke of Shadows do with peace? Caedric considered the question, stared into the fire while the celebration continued around them. I rebuild, he said finally. Not just trade routes or political alliances, but the things Whitmore and Greystone tried to break. Trust, community, the idea that power exists to protect people instead of exploiting them. That is ambitious. It is necessary. Because if the last 7 years taught me anything, it is that ruling through fear eventually leaves you alone in a frozen fortress with only ghosts for company. He looked at Blackthorn. I want different for the North. Better. The kind of place Alexander believed we could create if we just cared enough to try. Sounds exhausting, Blackthorn observed. Probably. But Isolde will be there to remind me when I am being an idiot. And you will be there to mock me when I'm being too serious. Between the two of you, I might actually become tolerable. Blackthorn laughed. Do not get carried away. You will always be insufferable. We are just hoping for slightly less insufferable. Fair enough? They drank again. Then Isolde appeared, pulling Caedric toward the dance floor despite his protests. I do not dance, he said. You did not love either, she replied. But you are learning. She was right. He was learning. How to care without controlling. How to trust without surrendering. How to live in a world that was no longer defined by vengeance and grief. They danced badly. Caedric had no rhythm. Isolde kept laughing at his attempts, but neither cared about technique. They were simply 2 people who had survived impossible odds, learning to exist in the spaces between danger. The celebration continued until dawn broke over Yorkshire. Guests departed slowly. Servants cleaned. The great hall returned to its usual silence. Caedric and Isolde stood on the balcony overlooking the frozen gardens, wrapped in heavy cloaks against the winter morning. Do you regret it? He asked. All of this. The danger. The constant threat. Marrying a man who comes with more enemies than assets. She leaned against him. I regret nothing, because every terrible moment led here. To us. Together. And that matters more than safety ever could. Even knowing more threats will come? Especially knowing that. Because the alternative is living small, playing it safe, dying slowly instead of risking everything for something worth fighting for. She turned to face him fully. You taught me that, Caedric. The Duke of Shadows, who everyone feared, showed me that the bravest thing is not avoiding pain. It is choosing who you suffer for. He kissed her forehead. When did you become the wise one? I was always wise. You just took 7 years to notice. Fair point. They stood together as the sun rose higher, burning away the night. Below them, Yorkshire spread out in all directions. Villages struggling through winter. Farms buried in snow. Families working to survive another brutal season. All of them under the protection of a duke who had finally learned that power without purpose was just elaborate cruelty. Caedric made a silent vow to the frozen landscape. He would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the second chance Alexander's death and Isolde's love had given him. Not by being perfect, but by caring enough to try. 3 months later, spring came to Yorkshire. Ice melted. Rivers flowed. Green shoots pushed through soil that had seemed permanently frozen. The transformation was slower than Caedric wanted, but faster than he expected. Trade routes reopened with fair contracts. Families received restitution for what Greystone had stolen. New agreements were negotiated that benefited communities instead of just enriching nobles. It was exhausting work, but for the first time in 7 years, exhaustion felt like progress instead of punishment. Isolde became the Duchess of Valamont in more than just title. She worked beside Caedric, offering perspectives he would have dismissed before. Challenging decisions, pushing him toward compassion when his instinct defaulted to control. They argued frequently. She won most of the arguments because she was usually right. Caedric learned to accept this with only moderate grumbling. Blackthorn remained in Yorkshire, taking a position as Caedric's official advisor. The two men who had once been enemies became the kind of friends forged in shared trauma and mutual respect. On a warm April morning, Caedric stood in the graveyard where Alexander was buried. The headstone was simple. His brother had never wanted ostentation. "I did it," Caedric said quietly. "I found who killed you, destroyed the conspiracy, made them pay for everything they stole." He paused. "But that is not what matters, is it? You did not investigate corruption because you wanted revenge. You did it because you believed people deserved better, that the North could become something worth protecting instead of just exploiting." The wind rustled through new grass. "I'm trying to finish what you started, Alexander. Rebuild what they broke. Create the kind of place where power protects instead of destroys. It is harder than I expected, but Isolde helps. She is like you in the ways that matter. Stubborn, principled, unwilling to accept that the world has to stay broken." He knelt, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "I miss you," he said, "every day. But I'm learning that grief does not mean forgetting. It means carrying the best parts of who you were and trying to honor them through how I live." He stood slowly. Behind him, Isolde waited at the graveyard entrance, giving him space but present if needed. The sight of her made his chest tighten with gratitude and lingering disbelief that she had chosen this life. They walked back to Valamont Hall together through countryside coming alive after the long winter. That evening, they stood in the same study where Edmund had burned evidence, where Caedric had planned Whitmore's downfall, where so many difficult decisions had been made. Now it held different energy, still serious, still weighted with responsibility, but no longer suffocating. "I received a letter from the Crown today," Caedric said, handing it to Isolde. She read quickly. "They want you to testify before Parliament, help reform trade law, serve as an example of corruption exposed and justice achieved. Apparently surviving conspiracy makes you credible," he said dryly. "Will you do it?" He considered. Years ago, the answer would have been no. Politics was beneath him. Let others handle governance while he focused on power. But Alexander had died trying to expose corruption in Parliament, and honoring that death meant finishing the work. "Yes," he said, "I will testify. Help them build something better. Use what we learned to prevent others from suffering the same." Isolde smiled. The Duke of Shadows becoming a force for good. Who would have predicted that? "Not me," he admitted. "But you did? You saw something in the frozen bastard ruling Yorkshire that even he could not recognize." "I saw pain," she corrected, "and the possibility that pain could become purpose instead of poison." She moved into his arms. "We survived, Caedric. The conspiracy, the betrayals, the constant threats. We actually survived and get to live the life we fought for." He held her close, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. Survival was not just escaping danger, it was building something afterward, creating meaning from the ruins, choosing growth over stagnation. "I love you," he said, "not because you saved me, but because you made me want to be worth saving." She pulled back to look at him. "You were always worth it, Caedric. You just needed time to believe that yourself." They stood together as evening deepened into night. Outside, Yorkshire continued its eternal rhythm. Seasons changing, people working, life moving forward despite everything that tried to stop it. And inside Valamont Hall, two people who had survived the worst learned to embrace the best. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with the fierce determination of those who understood that the real victory was not defeating enemies. It was choosing who you became after the battle ended. Teens. 5 years passed. Valamont Hall transformed slowly. The frozen fortress became something warmer without losing its strength. Servants laughed in corridors. Children from the village played in gardens that had been off-limits for generations. The Great Hall hosted gatherings that built community instead of displaying power. Caedric stood at the same window where he had once surveyed his domain with cold calculation. Now he watched his 3-year-old daughter chase butterflies through the spring grass, while Isolde sat nearby, pregnant with their second child. The sight made his throat tight with emotion he no longer tried to suppress. Blackthorn appeared in the doorway. "You have gotten soft, Duke Valemont. The man I met 7 years ago would never have permitted this chaos." "The man you met 7 years ago was barely alive," Caedric replied. "This is better." "Agreed. Though watching you change diapers remains deeply unsettling. Someone has to. Isolde handles enough as it is." Their daughter squealed with delight, tackling a particularly stubborn butterfly. "What would Alexander think?" Blackthorn asked quietly. Caedric considered. "He would mock me for the diapers. Lecture me about being too lenient with staff. Remind me constantly that power requires responsibility." He smiled. "Then he would be proud. Because I finally understand what he was trying to tell me, that being strong does not mean being hard, that caring for people is not weakness, that the best way to honor those who died is by making sure their sacrifices create something worth protecting." The two men stood in comfortable silence. Outside, Isolde called for their daughter. The girl ran to her mother, chattering about butterflies and flowers, and all the important concerns of childhood. "I am going to London next month," Caedric said. "The king wants me to advise on northern trade policy. Ensure the reforms we implemented here spread across England. You hate London. I hate what London represents. But if I want the north to thrive, I need to engage with the politics I used to dismiss. Alexander understood that. Now I do too." He turned from the window. "The Duke of Shadows is dead, Blackthorn. He died the moment I chose love over revenge. What remains is just a man trying to be better than his worst moments." "That man is doing fine," Blackthorn said. "Better than fine. You built something real here, something that will outlast you. That is the goal. Leave the world slightly less broken than I found it. Ambitious. Necessary." They walked downstairs together, heading toward the gardens where Isolde waited. As Caedric stepped into the sunlight, his daughter ran to him. He scooped her up, listening to her excited explanation of butterfly hunting. And in that moment, he felt Alexander's presence. Not as grief, but as approval. The kind that came from knowing your suffering had meaning because it prevented others from experiencing the same. Isolde smiled at him over their daughter's head. "You're thinking too much again." "Always," he admitted. "Well, stop. Come enjoy this. The sunshine, the peace, the life we built from ashes." She was right. The war was over. The enemies defeated. The future uncertain but no longer defined by fear. So Caedric set down the weight he had carried for 7 years. Not forgetting, just choosing to carry love instead of loss. They spent the afternoon in the gardens. Simple. Quiet. The kind of domestic peace that would have bored him once. Now it felt like the greatest victory imaginable. That evening, after their daughter was asleep, Caedric and Isolde stood on the balcony overlooking Yorkshire. The same view from their wedding night, but transformed by time and choice and the accumulated weight of every decision that led here. "Do you ever regret it?" Isolde asked. "Giving up the power, the fear, the control that made you untouchable." "Every day," he said honestly. "Then I look at you, at our daughter, at the life we are building. And I realize being touchable is the point." She leaned into him. The Duke of Shadows, who everyone feared, turned out to be just a man who needed someone to believe he could change. Not just someone. "You." She smiled. "Lucky for both of us, I am stubborn. Lucky for everyone, you are stubborn." They stood together as the stars emerged one by one. Far below, Yorkshire slept peacefully. Villages thrived. Families recovered. The North healed slowly from decades of corruption and exploitation, all because one woman had walked into a frozen fortress and refused to accept that monsters could not become men. All because one duke had finally learned that the strongest thing he could do was admit he needed help. All because love, terrifying and irrational and utterly transformative, had proven more powerful than any weapon. Caedric pulled Isolde closer, breathing in the reality of his life. No longer ruled by ghosts, no longer defined by vengeance. Just a man who had survived the worst and chosen to build something better. The Duke of Shadows was dead. What remained was simply Caedric Valemont, husband, father, leader who ruled with purpose instead of fear. Not perfect, never perfect, but human. And humanity, he had learned, was the greatest strength of all, because only humans could choose growth over destruction. Only humans could transform pain into purpose. Only humans could look at the ruins of what they had been and decide to build something beautiful from the rubble. The night deepened over Yorkshire. Inside Valamont Hall, fires burned warm, laughter echoed. Life continued its eternal forward march, and on the balcony, two people who had survived impossible odds simply held each other and appreciated the miracle of still being alive. Together, scarred but healing, broken but rebuilding, human in all the messy, complicated, beautiful ways that mattered. The story of the Duke of Shadows ended here, not with conquest or revenge or dramatic final battles, but with the quiet recognition that surviving was not enough. You had to learn to live afterward, and living meant choosing who you became when the fighting finally stopped. Caedric Valemont had made his choice, and Yorkshire was better for it.